The day the sky forgot its colour, Beth was 7 years old, sitting cross-legged in the backyard with her elbows propped on the soft dirt. She was trying to draw clouds in a notebook that had already been bent and warped by weeks of sunlight. Normally the sky above her house was the same pale summer blue she'd known all her life. But that day it was not. It wasn't black. It wasn't white. It wasn't even grey. It was as if someone had erased the colour from the world and left the space above her head a blank page, waiting for someone to decide what it should be. I think, even then, she understood something about strange days, that they weren't accidents, not really. They were gentle taps on the shoulder from something bigger, telling you to pay attention. And Beth did. She always did. You know. Before we begin properly, I want to tell you something important. We love you. Really. The kind of love that doesn't ask you to be more than you are. The kind that's just happy you're here, right now. You matter in ways you probably don't even see yet. So, before we sink deeper into this story, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it there? I like to imagine you in your own quiet corner, maybe with the soft hum of something familiar in the background. Now, grab your coffee, or tea if you prefer, and let's step into this strange little day together. It began with the wind, not the dramatic kind, not the kind that howls or slams doors shut, but the slow, wandering breeze that plays with hair and flutters the corners of paper. It smelled faintly of metal that morning, a sharp scent Beth didn't yet recognize. Somewhere inside, she knew her father had been in the garage all night again. She could always tell by the smell. Rick had been working on something she wasn't supposed to see. He was always working on something she wasn't supposed to see. But the trouble was, sometimes those somethings spilled into the world outside, into her world. And today, the sky's missing colour felt like one of those spills. She pressed her pencil harder into the notebook, drawing clouds with no blue behind them, wondering if they still looked like clouds without the colour to hold them up. In the distance, she heard the faint fizz and pop of some machine winding down. Then Rick's voice, muffled but sharp, like he was arguing with the air itself. She didn't catch the words, but she caught the tone, the way it shifted from irritated to almost sad. Beth had a way of noticing emotions before understanding their reasons. It was a skill she didn't think of as a skill at the time, just part of being alive. She could hear it in the way her dad's footsteps slowed as he came out of the garage. She could feel it in the way the wind stilled, like even the air was waiting to see what he'd say. Rick came into the backyard, coat half on, goggles hanging loosely around his neck. His hair was even wilder than usual, and his eyes flicked up at the empty-coloured sky. He didn't say, "Look at that," or "Don't worry," or any of the things a regular dad might say. He just stood there for a moment, looking at it with her, his mouth a tight line. "Sky'll fix itself," he muttered eventually, though Beth knew he didn't believe it. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. "Did you make it do that?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Rick's jaw shifted, and he didn't answer right away. "Not exactly," he said finally. "Sometimes things just leak through." Beth pictured a jar of paint tipped over on a table, dripping slowly, and wondered what kind of jar could spill something big enough to take all the colour from above their heads. She didn't know it then, but she'd remember this moment for the rest of her life. Not because of the strange sky, but because of the way her father looked at it, like he recognized it. They stood together for a long time, not speaking. She drew another cloud in her notebook, this one barely touching the edge of the page, as if it might float away if she didn't anchor it. After a while, Rick knelt beside her. His knees cracked. She noticed because she noticed everything, and he reached into his pocket. "Here," he said, pulling out a small metal disc no bigger than a cookie. "Draw on this instead." Beth took it carefully. It was heavier than she expected, and warm as if it had been holding on to someone's heartbeat. She looked up at him, waiting for an explanation. "It'll remember," he said, scratching at the back of his neck. "Whatever you draw won't fade, even if the real thing does." She didn't ask how. She didn't need to. She pressed her pencil against the smooth metal surface and began sketching the pale, anchorless clouds. The pencil glided differently than on paper, leaving lines that seemed to sink in instead of sitting on top. When she looked away, just for a second, she could swear the clouds on the disk shifted slightly, drifting in a wind only they could feel. "Why does it need to remember?" she asked softly. Rick didn't answer. He was already looking back at the sky, his expression unreadable. By afternoon, the missing colour began to return, but not all at once. It came in streaks like paint brushed back onto the world by an unseen hand. The white clouds regained their blue backdrop slowly, cautiously. The breeze carried the smell of grass again instead of metal. Beth kept the disc in her pocket. That night, she put it on the small table beside her bed, next to a glass of water and a little lamp shaped like a horse. She liked to imagine the clouds on the disc were still drifting, even while she slept, carrying the memory of the day somewhere far away. Years later, when she'd long since learned the truth about Rick's inventions, she'd realized the disc wasn't just a keepsake. It was a piece of something bigger, a leftover fragment from one of the places he'd been. But back then, it was just her cloud disc, just something to hold when she wanted to remember that strange, quiet day. She would tell herself it was the first day she truly saw her father. Not the brilliant inventor, not the man who argued with the air, just a person, standing beside her under a sky that had lost something and waiting for it to come back. And maybe that's why the memory stayed, because some part of her knew that even in a world where anything could happen, the most important moments were the ones where nothing did. Just two people looking up. Somewhere outside her window that night, Rick was probably already back in his garage, tinkering with something that would open doors to places she couldn't yet imagine. But Beth was content to close her eyes, the silver disc warm in her palm, and let the clouds carry her into sleep. The day the sky forgot its colour would always be the beginning of her story, even if she didn't know it yet. Beth woke to the sound of hooves, not the far-off kind that belonged in a country dream, fading in and out like wind through tall grass, but the close kind, the weighty, deliberate thud of something alive standing right outside her window. It was early, the light in her room still the pale gold of a sun that hadn't made up its mind yet. She sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, and for a moment wondered if she'd brought the sound with her from her dreams. She'd been dreaming about the clouds again, the ones on the silver disc her father had given her. In the dream, they'd been moving so fast they'd turned into waves. But the hooves were here. Beth padded over to the window in bare feet, the cool floorboards pressing the chill of morning up into her toes. She pushed aside the curtain and looked into the backyard. And there it was. A horse. It was tall, with a coat the colour of soft rain on silver metal, mane drifting like slow smoke in the breeze. Its eyes caught the light strangely, as if they were two tiny mirrors, reflecting the world back to her. But it wasn't tethered. It wasn't eating. It was just standing there, perfectly still. Beth had never seen a horse in her backyard before. She didn't live anywhere near a place where horses wandered loose. She pressed her palm to the glass and whispered, "Hello." The horse flicked its ears but didn't move. Behind her the floor creaked. She turned to see Rick leaning against the doorframe, coat half on, as though he'd been interrupted on his way somewhere. His hair was sticking out at odd angles, and his eyes, well, they didn't look surprised. "Don't touch it," he said, voice low, almost distracted. Beth frowned. "Why not?" Rick scratched at his jaw, eyes still on the horse. "It's not exactly a horse." She blinked, then looked back at the creature. It looked exactly like a horse. "Then what is it?" Rick didn't answer right away. He stepped closer to the window, hands in his pockets. "Sometimes," he said finally, "things slip through. Things that look like something you know, so your brain doesn't panic. But if you look long enough, you'll see it." Beth did look. She looked so hard her eyes started to ache, and then she saw it. The way its mane didn't quite match the wind, the way the space between its legs seemed deeper than the space around them, and the way its shadow, if it was a shadow, bent slightly in the wrong direction. Her voice was quieter now. Where did it come from? Rick shrugged one shoulder. Somewhere it probably wants to get back to. Beth turned to him. "So, should we send it back?" Rick looked at her then, really looked at her, like he was deciding whether or not she was ready for the truth. Not everything lost needs to be sent home, he said. Some things just need somewhere to stand for a while. They stood at the window together for a long time, watching the horse not horse as it shifted its weight, slow and careful. Eventually Beth couldn't help herself. She slipped her shoes on and stepped outside. The air was cool and smelled faintly of something sweet, not flowers, but something softer, like warm bread from a bakery she'd never been to. She approached slowly, each step deliberate. The horse watched her, head slightly tilted. Up close she could see that its skin shimmered faintly, like light beneath water. "I won't hurt you," she whispered. The horse lowered its head, and for a moment Beth thought it might let her touch it. She lifted her hand, and then it stepped back. Not far, just enough to let her know that was close enough. Rick's voice came from the porch. "It'll leave when it's ready." Beth glanced back at him, then at the horse. "How will it know?" Rick lit something in his hands, a small device that hummed faintly, and said, "Same way you know when you're ready to go somewhere new. You just feel it." Beth didn't fully understand, but she stayed with the creature anyway, sitting cross-legged in the grass a few feet away. They didn't touch. They didn't speak, at least not in words, but she felt its stillness like a blanket. She thought about the sky that had lost its colour and wondered if this horse had ever seen skies like that where it came from. Hours passed. The light shifted. Eventually the air around the horse shimmered more intensely like heat over a road. And then, without a sound, it was gone. Beth looked down. In the grass where it had stood was a single long hair from its mane glowing faintly. She picked it up and held it in her palm. It was warm, just like the silver disc had been. Rick was already heading back inside. "Keep it," he called over his shoulder. "It'll remember." That night, Beth put the glowing hair next to the disc on her bedside table. She imagined the two of them, the drifting clouds and the quiet horse, keeping each other company while she slept. She didn't know it yet, but she was building a collection, not of objects exactly, but of small pieces of the impossible, pieces she could keep and remember, even if the rest of the world forgot they'd ever existed. And as she drifted towards sleep, she thought that maybe she understood what her father had meant. Not everything lost needed to be sent home. Sometimes you were its home for a little while. Beth had always been curious about the garage. Not the kind of curiosity that made her want to run in and poke at everything. No, hers was quieter. She liked to stand in the doorway, hands clasped behind her back, and just look. It was like staring at the surface of a pond and wondering what lived at the bottom. Rick's garage didn't look like other garages. There were no bikes, no dusty boxes of holiday decorations, no racks of tools neatly hung on pegs. Instead, it was a tangle of wires and half-built machines, jars of liquid in colours she'd never seen before, and a workbench littered with strange scraps that looked like they belonged to objects that didn't exist yet. The smell was always the same: sharp metal, old paper, and something faintly electric. One afternoon, while Rick was in the kitchen arguing with the toaster, which had recently learned to talk back, Beth wandered to the open garage door. She didn't mean to touch anything. She never meant to. But her eyes landed on something small and round sitting on the bench, a piece of metal no bigger than her fist, with wires trailing from one end like the roots of a plant. It looked harmless. She reached out, her fingers hovering above it for a moment before they made contact. The metal was cool, not just cool like a coin, but cool in a way that sank straight into her skin, as if it had been somewhere very far away from the sun. For a moment she thought she felt it pulse, just once, like a faint heartbeat. Her breath caught. It wasn't like touching the silver disc with the clouds on it. That had felt warm, alive. This was different. It was as if she'd placed her hand on the surface of something that didn't know she existed. And then, just for a second, she saw something. Not with her eyes exactly, but with that strange behind-the-eyes part of her that sometimes lit up when she dreamed. A vast, dark place filled with floating points of light, each moving slowly as though they were breathing. She wasn't afraid, but she knew she shouldn't be here. She pulled her hand back quickly. The metal stayed exactly where it was, silent and still. Behind her, Rick's voice startled her. "Don't mess with that." She turned, guilty and wide-eyed. "I wasn't messing with it," she said softly. Rick raised an eyebrow. "Uh-huh." He walked past her and picked the object up with a pair of metal tongs, setting it into a small glass-fronted cabinet. The cabinet hissed softly as it sealed. "What is it?" she asked. Rick didn't look at her. "Cold storage, something that needs to stay asleep." Beth tilted her head. "It's alive." Rick hesitated, and that more than anything told her the answer was complicated. "Not in the way you're thinking," he said finally. "More like, if you woke it up, it would start doing what it was built to do. And nobody wants that." She thought about the feeling in her fingers, that faint alien heartbeat. She wanted to ask what it had been built to do, but Rick's expression told her that was a question for another time, maybe another year. Instead, she said, "It didn't feel asleep." That made him pause. He looked at her for a long moment, then back at the cabinet. "You've got good instincts," he said, almost to himself. "Dangerous ones." He turned back to his work, muttering under his breath, and Beth knew the conversation was over. But that night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She lay in bed with the silver cloud disk in one hand and the faintly glowing horsehair in the other, and she imagined the cold piece of metal sleeping in its glass box across the hall. She imagined its slow, silent breath and wondered if it could dream. Weeks later, Rick would take the object somewhere else. "Somewhere it can't be found," he'd say, and Beth would never see it again. But she'd always remember that moment, her small hand on something impossibly far from her own life, feeling the thin line between stillness and awakening. It was the first time she realized that not everything in her father's garage was meant to be used. Some things were meant to be left alone, and that sometimes the hardest thing you could do was exactly that. The first time Beth saw the sandwich machine, she thought it was a joke. It wasn't much to look at, just a small metal box with a wide slot in the top, about the size of an old bread tin. No buttons, no lights, no little screen. It just sat there on the kitchen counter, like it had always been there, humming faintly, like it was thinking. Rick set a plate down in front of it and tapped the side. "Hungry?" he asked. Beth shrugged. "A little." Without another word, he reached into the slot and pulled out a perfect sandwich. Golden bread, crisp lettuce, slices of tomato and cheese that looked like it belonged in a commercial. He handed it to her, and she took it carefully, as if it might vanish if she held it too tight. She took a bite. It was perfect. The bread was warm, the cheese soft but not runny, the lettuce crisp. It tasted like the sandwiches she sometimes imagined her friends' mothers made for them, in houses that didn't smell faintly of welding and ozone. Beth swallowed and looked at Rick. "Where did it come from?" Rick smirked. "Where do you think? It's a sandwich machine." She glanced at the slot. "You mean, it just makes them? All the time?" "All the time," Rick said, tapping the side again. Another sandwich appeared, identical to the first. "Never runs out, won't spoil. You can take as many as you want." Beth didn't know what to say. She took another bite instead. Over the weeks that followed, the machine became part of her life. It was there after school when she was too tired to make anything else. It was there late at night when she'd sneak into the kitchen for a quiet snack, careful not to wake anyone. It was there on mornings when she didn't feel like cereal. The sandwiches always tasted exactly the same, comfortingly so. One rainy Saturday afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table with a book open in front of her, the sound of the rain tapping softly against the windows. The sandwich machine hummed gently on the counter. She'd eaten 3 already and was considering a 4th, not because she was hungry, but because the act of reaching in and pulling one out had become soothing. Rick came in, dripping from the rain, his coat leaving little puddles on the floor. He poured himself a coffee and sat across from her. "You like that thing, huh?" he asked. Beth nodded. "It's nice. Always the same." Rick leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, consistency's underrated." She looked at him. "Where do they come from?" He stared into his coffee for a moment. "From somewhere that doesn't mind sharing." She thought about that. "So, we're taking them?" Rick met her eyes. "Borrowing. It's not the same thing." Beth didn't know if she believed him, but she didn't press. That night, she dreamed about the place the sandwiches came from. She pictured an endless green meadow under a warm sun, with little tables set up in neat rows, each holding a plate of perfect sandwiches. Somewhere far away she could hear laughter, not loud but gentle, like people who didn't need to shout to be heard. When she woke, the dream lingered. She went to the kitchen and pulled out another sandwich, holding it in both hands like it was something fragile. She thought about the meadow again, and wondered if someone there noticed when she took one. Years later, when she would look back on the strange comforts of her childhood, the sandwich machine would be at the center of those memories. Not because it was magical, though it was. Not because it was impossible, though it absolutely was. But because it was steady. In a life full of things that flickered in and out of existence, here was one thing that stayed the same. Even after the day the machine stopped, without warning, without explanation, she kept the last sandwich it made. She didn't eat it. She wrapped it carefully and hid it in the back of the freezer, where it stayed for years, a small frozen reminder that some gifts aren't meant to last forever. But for now, she took another bite, letting the familiar taste fill her mouth, and listened to the rain. Beth couldn't remember what had kept her awake that night. It might have been the faint clinking of tools in the garage, or the strange hum that sometimes seeped into the walls when Rick was working. It might have been the way the air felt, heavy, as if it were holding its breath. Whatever it was, she found herself slipping out of bed and padding down the hall in bare feet. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak, the kind of sound a house makes when it wants you to think it's empty. She opened the back door and stepped into the cool night. The yard was washed in silver light. The stars seemed brighter than usual, not sharp and cold, but warm, almost soft, as though each one had been dipped in milk before being set in the sky. Beth tilted her head back and breathed in slowly, and then she heard it. Not a voice exactly, and not music either. More like a rhythm, a slow, steady pulse that seemed to come from somewhere above her, though it didn't sound like it was falling down to her. It felt like it was reaching out. She closed her eyes, and in the dark behind her eyelids, she saw them. The stars, not the same ones she saw with her eyes open, moving gently in a slow pattern, like dancers in a circle. Each turn they made left a trail of light that faded just before the next one passed. It wasn't frightening. It wasn't even surprising. It just was. Beth opened her eyes again and sat down in the grass, hugging her knees. The cool blades pressed against her skin, and the night smelled faintly of ozone and something sweet she couldn't name. She let the rhythm fill her until she felt herself swaying with it. Somewhere behind her, the door creaked, and she knew without looking that Rick was standing there. "You can hear it, can't you?" he said softly. Beth nodded. "What is it?" Rick came and sat beside her, his knees up, elbows resting on them. Some nights, when the conditions are right, they talk to each other. Beth frowned slightly. The stars. "Not like you and me," Rick said, his voice low. "Not in words. More like they share where they've been, what they've seen. And sometimes, if you're paying attention, you can hear the promise." Beth looked up again, her eyes searching for something beyond the obvious. What promise? Rick didn't answer right away. He was staring at the sky like a man reading a page no one else could see. "That they'll still be there," he said finally, "even after everything else changes." Beth thought about that. In her short life, she'd already seen so many things appear and disappear without warning. Creatures, machines, even whole pieces of the world. The idea of something staying that felt like a kind of magic she wanted to believe in. They stayed there together for a long time, listening. Beth began to notice that the rhythm wasn't just in the air, it was in her. In the way her heart seemed to slow and match it, in the way her thoughts softened. At one point she leaned her head against Rick's arm, and he didn't move away. Eventually the night deepened, and the silver warmth of the stars dimmed back into their usual sharp points. The rhythm faded until it was just the quiet of the yard again. Rick stood, brushing the grass from his coat. "Come on, kid. Time to sleep." Beth followed him inside, but before she closed her bedroom door, she whispered one last look at the sky through her window. And she thought, though she couldn't be sure, that one of the stars blinked just for her. Beth had always thought of doors as simple things. They were either open or shut, locked or unlocked. They were the polite beginnings and endings of rooms. But one morning, she found Rick crouched in the hallway, working on a door she'd walked past 1,000 times. It was the closet near the end of the hall, the one no one ever used. "Hand me the copper wrench," Rick said without looking up. Beth rummaged through the small case beside him and handed over something that looked more like an instrument than a tool. "What's wrong with it?" she asked. Rick tightened something on the doorknob and muttered, "Nothing's wrong with it. It just doesn't speak our language yet." Beth tilted her head. "Doors don't talk." Rick chuckled. "Every door talks. You just have to learn what they're saying." He twisted the knob once, twice, then knocked on it, gently, almost respectfully. From inside came the faintest vibration, like a string being plucked far away. Beth's eyes widened. What was that? "The door saying, 'Not today,'" Rick replied, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. He adjusted something else, then pressed his ear to the wood. "Doors have their own dialects. This one's a traveller's door, goes somewhere different each time you open it. You can't just barge in, you have to listen, find the right tone, make the right promise." Beth crouched beside him. "Can I hear it?" Rick handed her a small metal disc connected to a thin wire. She pressed it to the door and held the other end to her ear. At first she heard nothing but her own breathing. Then, faintly, there it was, a low hum, like wind curling through a distant canyon. It wasn't a sound she could explain, but it wasn't random either. It was shaped, like a sentence. "I think it's waiting," Beth whispered. Rick nodded approvingly. "Good. That's the first rule of doors like this. They open when they're ready, not when you are." Beth smiled. "That's a terrible rule." "Yeah," Rick said, standing up, "but the best rules are the terrible ones." He gave the knob one last twist and the vibration shifted. The wood seemed to ripple, not visibly, but in the way it felt under Beth's hand, like a heartbeat changing its pace. Rick opened the door. Beth expected darkness. Instead there was light, but not sunlight. It was the soft gold of evening, pouring over a cobblestone street she'd never seen before. The air smelled of bread baking and rain on stone. Somewhere far away someone was playing a violin, the notes warm and slow. Beth stepped forward, but Rick put a hand on her shoulder. "Not today," he said gently. "Just because a door opens doesn't mean you walk through. Sometimes the first lesson is patience." Beth glanced back at the street, longing pooling in her chest. It wasn't just curiosity, it was recognition. She didn't know how, but the air in that place felt like it remembered her. Rick closed the door and the gold light faded back into the dim hallway. Beth sighed. "Do you think it'll still be there next time?" Rick gave her a sideways look. "No door ever opens to the same place twice, but the places remember you too. That's the second rule." For the rest of the day, Beth found herself brushing her fingers over other doorknobs in the house, wondering what languages they spoke and whether they'd answer her if she asked nicely. That night, she dreamed of knocking on the closet door and hearing it answer in a voice like wind and music. In the dream, she understood every word. It began with a single dot. Beth found it one quiet afternoon, in the dusty library that no one seemed to use except for her. It wasn't on a book, but inside one, hidden between two brittle pages of an atlas so old that entire countries no longer existed in the same shape. The dot was ink black, but it shimmered faintly, as if light from somewhere else was trapped inside it. She ran her finger over the page, expecting to feel a bump or a stain, but the surface was perfectly smooth. Then, as she touched it, the dot spread. It wasn't ink bleeding into paper. It was more like watching frost grow across glass. Thin, delicate lines crept outward from the dot, curling and bending with strange precision. Mountains unfolded in miniature, rivers wound across the page in silver threads, and coastlines formed with little bursts of gold light. Beth stared, holding her breath. Within seconds, a whole island appeared on the map, a place she had never seen before. It was shaped like a crescent moon, with a tall range of hills down its spine. Tiny drawings filled the land, trees so detailed she could see their leaves, small villages with red-tiled roofs, winding roads that seemed to lean toward each other like old friends. Rick's voice came from behind her. "Ah, you found it." Beth jumped. "You knew about this?" Rick leaned over her shoulder, peering at the map. Of course. It's been waiting for you. Beth frowned. Waiting for me to do what? To decide where it goes next. She turned to him, confused. Maps show you where things are. You can't just add places. Rick grinned, that sideways grin that always meant he was about to say something impossible. Ordinary maps can't. This one's different. It doesn't record where you've been. It records where you could go. Beth glanced back at the page. The lines were still moving, subtly shifting like tides. How does it know? She asked quietly. Rick took the chair opposite hers and tapped the page with one finger. Maps like this don't just know places, they know travellers, they listen, they draw according to what's in your bones. Beth blinked. That sounds creepy. It's worse than creepy, Rick said with mock solemnity. It's accurate. Beth traced the edge of the crescent island with her fingertip. As she did, the map pulsed faintly beneath her skin, like the beat of a faraway drum. She felt an ache she couldn't quite name, something between homesickness and anticipation. What's it called? She asked. Rick shrugged. You're the cartographer now. You tell me. Beth looked at the map again. She saw a small bay on the inner curve of the island, cradled between cliffs. The water there was painted a deep, impossible blue. Moon Harbour, she whispered without knowing why. The moment she said it, the letters appeared on the page, curling in elegant script. The ink shimmered briefly, then settled as though it had always been there. Rick leaned back, satisfied. There you go. You've claimed it. Beth swallowed. Does that mean I can go there? Not yet, Rick said, standing. First you have to finish the map. Otherwise you might end up in the wrong Moon Harbour, and trust me, you don't want to meet the versions of yourself that live there. Beth tilted her head. Versions? But Rick was already walking toward the door. Finish the map, Beth, and don't let it finish itself without you. She stayed in the library until the light outside the tall windows faded to dusk. The map seemed alive under her hands. When she thought of forests, they appeared. When she imagined markets, tiny stalls bloomed along cobblestone streets. It felt less like she was inventing a place and more like she was remembering it. That night, she tucked the atlas under her pillow, and in her dreams, she stood at the harbour she had named, the sea air warm, the waves curling like fingers, and somewhere beyond the hills, a road that seemed to be waiting just for her footsteps. The first time Beth entered the room, it seemed ordinary. A small lamp on a low wooden table, a chair by the window, shelves that bowed slightly under the weight of books. The walls were a muted green, the kind of colour you might find in a memory rather than a house. She had opened the door only because she heard something, a faint sound like pages turning by themselves. Rick was nowhere in sight, though she could swear she had seen him walk down this hallway just seconds before. Beth stepped inside. The air felt warm, though there was no heater. It smelled faintly of rain-soaked earth, as if the windows had been opened during a storm. She turned to look at the books. When she looked back at the chair, it was gone. Beth froze. The corner where it had been now held a tall grandfather clock, its brass pendulum swinging slowly, each tick soft as a heartbeat. She frowned and glanced at the table. Only it wasn't there anymore. A small chest sat in its place, its wood darker than shadow, its lock shaped like an eye. Beth backed toward the door. Careful, said Rick's voice behind her. She spun around, but the hallway outside was empty. The door was closed. She touched the knob, warm as if it had been held just moments ago. But when she tried to open it, the latch wouldn't budge. Her pulse quickened. Beth turned again to face the room. The clock was gone. The chest was gone. Now there was a wide round table covered in objects she had never seen before. A tarnished silver compass, a candle that burned with a blue flame, a glass jar holding a single black feather. She stepped forward slowly. The compass spun wildly, though she hadn't touched it. The candle flickered without wind. The feather shifted, almost as if it were breathing. Beth reached out toward the jar and then stopped herself. She remembered what Rick had said once, half joking, but in that way where he wasn't joking at all. Never touch anything in a place that's deciding what it wants to be. Instead, she turned her gaze to the bookshelves. The titles had changed. They were no longer familiar languages, but long, curling scripts she couldn't read. Some covers glowed faintly, as though there was light inside the pages. One book at the far end hummed, the sound low and steady. Beth moved toward it, her steps soft. When she reached for it, the shelf was gone. The books, the walls, the lamp, everything dissolved into a different room entirely. Now she stood in a vast hall with vaulted ceilings, candlelight dripping from chandeliers, and a long carpet that stretched into the distance. The air was cool and carried the faint echo of footsteps, though she was alone. She took one step forward. The hall shifted again. This time she was in a narrow study where a single desk sat beneath a skylight. Outside, the sky churned in shades of violet and green, lightning blooming like flowers against the clouds. Beth's heart thudded. She closed her eyes, trying to still herself. She thought about the library, the steady smell of old paper, the familiar creak of the chair by the window. When she opened her eyes, the room obeyed. The green walls were back, the chair was back, the table with its lamp was back. The only difference was a folded piece of paper resting in the center of the table. Beth picked it up. The handwriting was small and slanted, almost hurried. Some rooms change because they can. Others change because they're listening. Beneath it was a rough drawing of a key. Beth turned the paper over, but the other side was blank. She felt the air shift again, the faint hum of something watching, not with eyes, but with attention. She tucked the note into her pocket and spoke aloud, though her voice trembled slightly. "I'll come back." The walls seemed to exhale, and the door behind her clicked open. When she stepped out into the hallway, Rick was leaning against the wall as if he'd been waiting there the whole time. "Find anything?" he asked casually. Beth hesitated. "A note, and a feeling that it knew I was there." Rick gave a slow nod. Some rooms remember people better than people remember rooms. Beth glanced back at the door, but it was just an ordinary wall now. She wanted to ask him what the key was for. She wanted to ask what the room had been before it learned to shift. But Rick was already walking away, whistling tunelessly. Beth followed, but she kept her hand in her pocket, fingers brushing the paper, wondering what would happen if she went back when the room wasn't expecting her. It was not a grand mirror, not the gilded, towering kind you might expect in palaces or old theatres. It was small, no taller than Beth's shoulder, its frame made of blackened wood, carved with a pattern that looked like curling vines, or perhaps something older, stranger, that vines had learned to imitate. Rick didn't introduce it. He simply left it leaning against the far wall of a quiet room, as if it had always been there, as if its presence needed no explanation. Beth noticed it only because she felt a faint shift in the air when she passed. Not wind, not warmth, but something like the feeling of walking through a dream you half remember. She stopped in front of it. The surface was not quite reflective. The glass held a faint haze, as though mist lay just behind it. Her own face appeared dimly, softened at the edges like an old photograph. But then she noticed she was moving differently. In the mirror, her reflection leaned closer, though she had not moved. Beth's breath caught. The reflected Beth tilted her head, studying her with an expression she didn't recognize, a small, knowing smile that felt like it belonged to someone who had already lived the next day. Beth raised her hand. The reflection mirrored her. But there was a lag, a heartbeat of delay, as though the mirror needed to think before obeying. She whispered, "What are you?" The reflection's lips moved with hers, but the delay made the question sound doubled, her own voice chasing itself through the glass. Then the scene behind her reflection shifted. It was subtle at first, the way the light fell, the faint shapes beyond her own shoulder. The room in the mirror wasn't the room she stood in now. The table was gone. The window stood open to a sky she did not recognize. Beth stepped back. Her reflection did not. Instead, the mirror Beth turned, looking towards something just outside the frame, and her smile deepened as though she saw someone she'd been waiting for. A shadow crossed the mirrored room, tall, indistinct, but familiar in the way a voice from another room is familiar. Beth's pulse quickened. She had seen enough strange things in this place to know she was not looking at the past. This was not memory. This was something else. She crouched in front of the mirror, bringing her face level with her reflections. "Show me," she said softly. The mist behind the glass deepened, swirled, and then cleared. The scene sharpened, a hallway she had not yet walked, a door she had not yet opened. Her reflection, the Beth of tomorrow, reaching into her pocket to pull out something small and metallic. Beth realized what it was, the key from the drawing in the shifting room's note. She leaned closer, searching the mirrored world for more details. But the edges of the vision blurred when she tried to focus too hard, as if the mirror was punishing her for greed. Rick's voice broke the spell. "Careful," he said from the doorway. Beth turned sharply. He was leaning against the frame, arms folded, watching her with that expression he wore when he knew more than he would say. "This isn't just a mirror," Beth said. "No," Rick agreed. "It's a promise." Beth glanced back at the glass. Her reflection was now perfectly in sync with her. No strange rooms, no shadows, no key. Just a dim, softened image of herself, breathing in the same moment. "What does it want?" she asked. Rick stepped inside, his boots soft on the floorboards. "Mirrors like this don't want. They wait for the moment they're meant to show." Beth frowned. "And when that moment comes, then it stops waiting." The answer gave her no comfort. She turned back to the mirror, half expecting it to shift again, but it only showed her present self. Still, she could feel it, the quiet awareness, the hum of something patient on the other side. Beth pressed her fingertips to the cool glass. "If it showed me tomorrow," she murmured, "then tomorrow is already written." Rick tilted his head. "Or maybe it showed you a door you don't have to open." She met his eyes. "Would you open it?" Rick's smile was faint. "I've walked through too many doors to pretend I wouldn't." Beth looked one last time into the misty reflection, searching for the faintest trace of what she had seen. The hallway, the door, the key. Nothing remained but her own face, dim and ghost-soft. Still, when she stepped away, she felt the same strange shift in the air she had felt when she first approached, as if the mirror had followed her, as if tomorrow was already leaning toward her, ready to arrive. It began with a door that should have led nowhere, a plain wooden door, narrow and unremarkable, tucked into a side wall Beth swore had been blank the day before. She stood before it for a long while, unsure if she should knock, as if the air beyond might be sleeping. Finally she turned the handle. The door opened soundlessly, revealing a corridor washed in pale gold light. Light that came from nowhere visible. The walls were simple, the floor of worn wood, yet there was something strange about the way they drew the eye forward. Beth stepped inside. The moment she did, the air changed. It felt cooler, lighter, almost weightless. The door closed softly behind her without her touching it. She began to walk. Her footsteps echoed faintly, as if the walls themselves were listening. The hallway seemed ordinary at first, plain, repeating wall sconces, the occasional framed picture of landscapes she didn't recognize. But after a dozen steps, Beth frowned. She turned her head, glancing back. The door was gone. Where it had been was now just more hallway, stretching endlessly behind her. Beth slowed, the weight of the place settling in her chest. She knew, in that deep, quiet way one sometimes knows in dreams, that this corridor was not bound by ordinary space. She kept walking. After what felt like minutes, she passed a table against the wall. A small vase sat on it, holding a single wilting lily. She touched its petal. It was cool, almost damp, as if freshly plucked. She walked on. Another few dozen steps brought her to the same table, the same lily, the same faint drop of water clinging to its stem. Beth's heart beat slower now, not from calm, but from the strange awareness that she had entered something that did not want to end. She tried walking faster. The sconces blurred past, the frames on the walls becoming a rhythm. The table appeared again, over and over, every stretch of distance folding back into itself. Beth stopped abruptly. "What are you?" she whispered into the air. The corridor did not answer. And then she heard it. A faint tapping, like footsteps far ahead. Beth squinted into the golden haze. A shape was there, small and still, waiting. She moved toward it. Her footsteps joined the tapping until the sounds were one. The figure resolved into a man, or the outline of one, standing with his back to her. When she was close enough to speak, she opened her mouth, and he turned. It was Rick, or rather, a version of Rick. His hair was slightly longer, his clothes not quite the same. His eyes held a distance she had never seen before, as if they had been looking down this corridor far longer than she had been alive. "You found it," he said quietly. Beth hesitated. "What is this place?" He glanced past her, down the endless stretch she had walked. Some call it a loop, others a waiting room. I think of it as a test. A test for what? For whether you can keep walking when you don't know if there's an end. Beth's gaze flicked over his face. "How long have you been here?" He smiled faintly, but not kindly. Long enough to forget what came before. Her skin prickled. "You're not my Rick, are you?" "Does it matter?" he asked. Beth wanted to say yes, but something in the way he spoke made her realize the question had no real answer. He stepped aside, gesturing down the hall. "You can stop walking if you like. The corridor will keep itself, or you can go on. But if you go on, you should know—" He trailed off. "Know what?" she pressed. His eyes softened, though the rest of him stayed still. "That, when you reach the end, you may find it's only the beginning again." Beth's mouth went dry. She glanced down the endless hall, the light shifting ever so slightly with each breath. When she turned back, he was gone. Only the sound of her own breathing remained. Beth stood there for a long moment, the stillness pressing in, and then, with no other choice that felt like a choice at all, she began walking again. The corridor stretched, unbroken. The sconces glowed. The table with the lily waited ahead. And far, far away, somewhere beyond sight, something was listening. Beth found it on the floor of the hallway one quiet evening. It wasn't a key she had seen before, though something about it felt familiar, like an echo of memory she couldn't quite place. The metal was warm under her fingers, smooth but slightly heavy, like it had been waiting for her hand. The teeth were not ordinary, jagged and uneven, curling in subtle spirals as if they had been grown rather than forged. She turned it over in her palm, unsure where it had come from. Rick, perched casually on the edge of the staircase, noticed her holding it. "You found it," he said, as if that explained everything. Beth frowned. "I didn't even know I was looking for it." Rick tilted his head. "Most keys aren't found, they're remembered. You just have to recognize them when they appear." Beth studied the key again. She tried it in the lock of her bedroom door, the door to the shifting room, even the closet where the sandwich machine had once hummed quietly. Nothing fit. Rick's gaze softened. "It doesn't belong to anything you've seen yet." She turned it over in her hand again, tracing the spirals of the teeth with her fingertip. "Then how do I know where it goes?" Rick stood and walked toward her, boots silent on the floorboards. He crouched to her level, his eyes not unkind, though heavy with things she didn't yet understand. "You'll know," he said simply. "Some keys aren't about doors. Some keys are about noticing the right moment." Beth felt the weight of his words, as tangible as the metal she held. She slipped the key into her pocket, careful to keep it near her chest. That night, she dreamed of doors she had never seen, lined up like stars in a night sky, each one glowing faintly. She tried each in turn. Some were cold and still. Some whispered faintly when she touched them, the wood groaning in anticipation. But none of them turned the key. Finally she came to a door that was no taller than her own hand, painted the softest shade of lavender. She knelt and placed the key against the lock. It fit. The door swung open slowly, revealing a room that shimmered as if made of water and sunlight. Beth stepped inside. She could feel the warmth pooling around her feet, the air soft and humming with quiet energy. Everything was calm. There were shelves filled with tiny jars of coloured light. Each one pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, and the smell of honey and rain filled the air. The floor was soft underfoot, almost like moss. Beth wandered among the shelves, feeling the pulse of the room beneath her fingertips. Each jar seemed to respond to her presence, glowing brighter when she passed, dimming when she lingered. Somewhere deep in the back, she found a single jar larger than the rest. It was filled with a dark blue light that shimmered like the night sky she had watched from the yard. She reached for it. The moment her fingers brushed the glass, she felt something shift, a memory, not quite her own, brushing against her mind. She saw a hallway she had walked before, the corridor that didn't end, the mirror that had shown tomorrow, and the room that changed every time she looked away. And she understood. The key hadn't opened a door to a place. It had unlocked understanding. Beth took a deep breath. She held the jar to her chest, feeling the pulse of light against her skin. She thought of all the strange, impossible things she had encountered. The sandwich machine, the shifting room, the self-drawing map. And for the first time, she felt a quiet certainty. The world was bigger than she had ever known. But it was also hers, if she was willing to notice the doors, the corridors, the keys, and the light. Rick watched her silently from the doorway, letting her discovery unfold without interference. "Not everything needs an explanation," he said finally, his voice soft. "Some things just are, and they wait for you to be ready." Beth nodded, feeling the pulse of the jar settle into her chest. She didn't need to know why the key had appeared now, or what other doors might still be waiting. She just knew she had found this one. That night, as she lay in bed, the key hidden under her pillow and the jar's soft glow resting on her desk, she realized something else. The key wasn't about unlocking the world, it was about unlocking herself. And somewhere, just beyond the thin walls of the house, the corridors and doors and mirrors she had seen that day seemed to hum in quiet approval. Beth closed her eyes, the weight of the key and the warmth of the jar comforting her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she would be ready. And in that calm certainty, she slept. Beth noticed it first in the hallway, a clock she had never seen before. It wasn't large, not ornate, not demanding attention. Just a small, wooden wall clock, with hands as delicate as a bird's wing. Its face was a soft cream, the numbers curling like smoke. She stopped and stared. The hands moved not in a circle, but in gentle arcs that seemed to bend and sway with their own rhythm. The tick was faint, soft, almost musical, like a lullaby only half remembered. Rick appeared silently beside her, leaning against the wall. "Ah, you found it," he said. Beth frowned. "I don't remember putting it here." "That's because it wasn't," Rick replied. "Some things appear when you need them, not when you expect them." Beth's fingers itched to touch the face of the clock, but she hesitated. The air around it felt alive, like standing near a pond waiting for fish to break the surface. "What does it do?" she asked. Rick shrugged. "It counts dreams." Beth blinked. "Counts dreams?" Rick's smile was faint, patient. "Not just any dreams. The ones that matter, the ones that shape you while you sleep, the ones you'll remember and the ones you won't, but that will follow you anyway." She reached out tentatively. The moment her fingers brushed the clock's surface, she felt herself pulled gently, as if the world had tilted slightly, revealing layers beneath her own perception. She blinked. Suddenly, she was somewhere else. It was a field bathed in silver light, the grass moving like gentle waves. Stars hung impossibly low in the sky, humming softly. She could feel the rhythm of her own heartbeat sync with the pulse of the universe around her. Beth realized she was walking, though her feet barely touched the ground. Each step left ripples of light behind, like footprints in a memory yet to happen. A figure approached from the horizon, small, familiar, yet not quite anyone she knew. She reached out, but the figure dissolved into a cascade of tiny lights before her fingertips could brush it. She opened her eyes. Back in the hallway, the clock's hands had moved only a fraction. The soft music of its tick filled the silence. Beth pressed her palm against it, trying to hold on to the strange feeling the dream had left in her chest. Rick watched quietly. "It's patient," he said. "It doesn't rush. It waits for you to remember the pieces of yourself you left behind." Beth sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. She closed her eyes again, and this time she let the clock guide her. The dreams came slowly, one by one. She saw the shifting room and the key she had found. She saw the corridor that didn't end, stretching endlessly into golden light. She saw the mirror showing tomorrow, the self-drawing map, and the faint glow of jars filled with coloured light. Each vision overlapped the other, like pages in a book turning themselves in the night. Beth realized something else. She wasn't just seeing the dreams. She was feeling them, remembering the quiet lessons each had offered, the patience of the shifting room, the promise of the mirror, the attention of the map, the keys lesson that some things unlock themselves only when you're ready. Hours seemed to pass, though the clock's hands had barely moved. When she opened her eyes fully, Rick was beside her, still watching. "Time is strange here," he said. "It flows differently when you're counting dreams." Beth nodded. She understood that now. Time wasn't just measured in minutes or hours, it was measured in experiences, in small awakenings and quiet realizations. She reached out and touched the clock again. This time the hands shimmered slightly under her fingers, and she felt a faint tug, not pulling her anywhere, but inviting her to follow. "What's next?" she asked softly. Rick's smile was gentle, almost tender. "Next is whatever you need to find. The clock will show you, if you're paying attention." Beth rested her hand lightly on the wood, feeling the subtle vibration beneath her fingertips. She didn't need to know exactly where the dreams would take her. She just needed to trust that they were part of the path she was walking. For a long time, she sat there, listening to the soft tick, letting it fill the hallway, filling her mind with quiet wonder. And when she finally rose, the feeling remained, a calm certainty that no matter how strange the world became, some things were always steady. The clock counted her dreams, and in doing so, it counted the small, invisible moments that were shaping her. Moments of courage, curiosity, and quiet understanding. Beth placed her hand on the wall and felt the warmth of the wood beneath the clock. Somewhere in the distance, the soft pulse of the corridor, the shimmer of the map, and the gentle glow of the jar all seemed to echo together, weaving into the rhythm of the ticking hands. She smiled faintly, as if the world itself had offered a secret. And that night, as she lay in bed, she realized she could sleep knowing that even when she closed her eyes, the clock would keep watch. It would keep counting, keep remembering, keep guiding her through the soft, invisible lessons of her own becoming. And somewhere, in that quiet comfort, she drifted into dreams that were hers alone, rich with color, light, and the endless whisper of promise. Beth first noticed the garden on a day when she hadn't expected anything at all. She had been wandering the halls, her thoughts quiet, the weight of the key and the dreams still lingering like soft shadows in her mind. A door appeared where none had been before, narrow, arched, and painted in a soft shade of green that reminded her of early spring. She opened it slowly. The moment she stepped inside, the air shifted. It smelled of wet earth and sun-warmed stone, and faintly of flowers she could not name. The light was gentle, golden, spilling through leaves that seemed to shimmer in rhythms of their own. The garden was small at first, a handful of plants, a crooked path, a bench tucked under a leaning tree. Beth knelt to touch the soil. It was warm, moist, humming faintly beneath her fingertips. She felt it, almost instinctively, as if it had been waiting for her touch. A soft rustle came from the other side of the garden. She turned. A small figure emerged from between the trees, a fox, but not quite ordinary. Its fur shimmered faintly, like threads of light woven through soft shadows. Its eyes were curious and calm. Beth froze. The fox trotted to her, nose twitching, and nudged her hand gently. She laughed softly, the sound blending with the whisper of leaves and the faint hum of life all around her. Rick's voice came behind her. "Ah, the garden finds those who wait." Beth turned to see him leaning against the doorway. "Waited for what?" she asked. "For this," Rick said simply. "For noticing. Gardens like this, they grow in their own time, but they only bloom fully for those who take the time to care, even in small ways." Beth stood slowly. She walked along the path, touching leaves, brushing petals, feeling the soft vibration of life in every plant. The air seemed alive with quiet attention, as though the garden itself was breathing in rhythm with her heart. "This place," she whispered. "It's waiting." Rick nodded. "Yes, but not for you. It waits for itself, and you're lucky enough to find it in the process." Beth sat on the bench, letting her hand rest on the smooth wood. The fox curled at her feet, eyes half closed, content. She realized she could feel the growth around her, not just the plants, but the gentle shaping of time, the patient unfolding of things unseen. The garden reminded her of the shifting room, of the map that drew itself, of the corridor that didn't end. Each had its own rhythm, its own lesson. And now, this garden added another, the quiet wonder of growth without urgency. Beth closed her eyes for a moment, letting the soft sounds of the garden fill her mind. She could hear water dripping somewhere, leaves brushing lightly against each other, and the subtle hum of life beneath the soil. When she opened her eyes, she noticed a single sprout near the bench, tiny, almost fragile, glowing faintly at its tip. She touched it. The sprout shivered, then grew taller in the blink of an eye, unfolding into a small plant that bore flowers of soft golden light. Beth felt a warmth rise in her chest, a gentle recognition of her own patience mirrored in the garden's quiet bloom. Rick watched, silent, as if he understood that some things were too sacred to explain. "You're learning," he said finally. "Not everything in this world is about movement or change. Some things are about waiting, about watching, about noticing, without demanding." Beth nodded. She understood that. She thought of the key that didn't belong to any lock, the clock that counted dreams, the mirror that showed tomorrow, all of them lessons in patience, in presence, in understanding that some truths could not be rushed. The fox yawned and stretched, then trotted ahead to a patch of flowers that seemed to glow even brighter in response to its steps. Beth smiled, following the small creature along the path, letting her fingers brush leaves and petals. Every step in, the garden felt soft, deliberate, as if the air itself was cushioning her movement, guiding her attention to the quiet miracles around her. She came to a small pond at the center of the garden. The water reflected not her own face, but the gentle light of the flowers around it. She saw shapes moving beneath the surface, tiny fish made of silver light, gliding with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Beth knelt at the edge of the pond, letting her fingers skim the water. It rippled softly, sending reflections dancing across the nearby trees. She realized, suddenly, that she could feel the garden breathing with her, as if she were part of its quiet life. The plants leaned slightly toward her touch, the wind shifted to follow her motion, and the fox rested its head on her knee, soft and warm. Rick stepped closer. "Gardens like this," he said, "are patient teachers. They grow slowly, in their own time, and they remind you that the most important things in life are often the ones that need nothing from you except your attention." Beth sat back on the bench, closing her eyes. She could feel the gentle pulse of life all around her, the slow unfolding of growth, the quiet lessons of waiting and noticing. The garden was alive, and she, in this soft, impossible place, felt more alive than ever before. When she finally left, the door behind her closed quietly, blending back into the hallway. She carried the memory of the garden with her, its warmth and light tucked gently into her chest. That night, as she lay in bed, she dreamed of the garden again. She walked among the glowing flowers, the fox at her side, the soft wind brushing her hair. And in her sleep, she understood something profound, that growth, patience, and quiet wonder were as much a part of her as the key, the map, and the shifting rooms. Some things, she realized, didn't need to be rushed. Some things simply needed to be noticed. And somewhere, beyond walls, beyond doors, the garden continued to grow, waiting for her return. The night came slowly, as if it had nowhere urgent to be. Beth had finished her walk through the garden in her memory, closed the shifting room's doors behind her, and felt the quiet pull of the clock that counted dreams. Outside, the sky had darkened into deep indigo. A few stars glimmered faintly, their light almost hesitant, as if shy of revealing too much. Beth stood at the window, hands resting on the cool wood, listening. At first, there was nothing, only the soft whisper of the wind brushing against the roof. But then she heard it, a gentle whistling, faint, playful, carrying patterns she could almost understand. She leaned closer, curious. The sound seemed to slip through the cracks of the house, bending and curling around corners, rising and falling like breathing. Rick appeared in the doorway, holding his flask loosely. He didn't speak, just watched. Beth tilted her head toward him. Do you hear that? Rick nodded. The night has secrets. Some choose to whistle them. Beth smiled faintly. What does it mean? Depends on who's listening, Rick replied. Sometimes it's a story. Sometimes it's just noticing that the world is alive in ways we can't always name. She closed her eyes, letting the whistling fill her senses. It shifted then, bending into soft shapes like ribbons of sound brushing the edges of her mind. She could imagine stories behind it, whispers of travelers passing between worlds, leaves dancing on rooftops, the tiny laughter of creatures too small to see. Beth felt the pull of something familiar, a kind of warmth she could not place, mingling with the quiet awe of the moment. She thought of the corridor that didn't end, the mirror that showed tomorrow, the garden that grew while she waited. Everything seemed to hum together, a soft symphony of memory, possibility, and the invisible rhythms of life. The whistling rose a little higher, playful now, teasing her. Beth tilted her head, trying to follow its movement, and for a moment she thought she saw faint shapes in the darkness outside, soft flickers of light, moving in patterns that matched the melody. She laughed quietly. The sound felt light, warm, and it joined the music of the night. Rick leaned on the doorframe. Some nights, he said softly, you just need to listen. Not to understand, not to chase, just listen. Beth nodded. She opened the window slightly. The whistling flowed in like a river, brushing her hair, filling the small gaps between heartbeats. She felt it brush against the hidden corners of her mind, touching memories she hadn't thought of in years. The night didn't demand anything. It didn't ask her to solve riddles or find doors. It simply existed, breathing quietly, reminding her that she existed too, in gentle reflection, in subtle motion, in the soft pulse of being alive. Beth sat on the windowsill, the wind brushing against her, the whistling threading through her thoughts. She thought of the key she had found, the shifting room, the mirror, the garden, and the clock that counted dreams. Everything led here, to this quiet moment of noticing, of breathing, of listening. She let herself imagine the stories behind the whistling, tiny creatures tiptoeing across rooftops, the leaves of trees bending just slightly as if in conversation, stars tracing faint arcs in the sky, hinting at connections she could not name. And in that moment, she understood something. The night whispered not for answers, but for presence. To be there, to pay attention, to feel the subtle music of the world. Beth leaned back against the window frame, letting the cool air mix with the warmth of her thoughts. She realized she was smiling softly, not because she had found anything, but because she had noticed everything. Rick's voice broke the quiet again. The night remembers, he said. It remembers what we forget. It hums the truths we overlook in the day, and if we're patient, it sometimes sings them softly to us. Beth breathed deeply. She felt the night's song settle around her, a gentle embrace. Somewhere between the whistling and the stars, she felt the faint echo of all the rooms she had walked through, all the doors she had opened, all the dreams she had counted. And the world felt softer, infinitely patient, and ready to wait for her. Beth leaned her head back, letting her hair brush the sill. She closed her eyes, letting the soft rhythm of the night lull her thoughts. The whistling became a lullaby, gentle, steady, filled with the quiet awe of the unseen, the unspoken, the patiently waiting. In that stillness, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't known she could carry so fully. The weight of curiosity, the pull of questions, the echo of impossible doors, all folded into one simple, gentle truth. The world held its wonders quietly, and she had been lucky enough to notice. Rick stayed silently in the doorway, giving her space, letting the night continue its song. Beth let herself drift, not into sleep quite yet, but into the awareness of presence. Each note of the whistling seemed to touch something hidden in her chest, weaving a quiet thread between her and everything she had seen, felt, and discovered. And somewhere, beyond walls, doors, mirrors, corridors, gardens and clocks, the night continued its gentle melody, patient and eternal, waiting for all those who chose to listen. Beth smiled faintly. She didn't have to chase the secrets, she just had to hear them. The stars shifted imperceptibly in the sky, the wind whispered across rooftops, and the world, patient and attentive, held its quiet watch over her. She leaned back further, letting the soft music of the night sink into her chest, her mind, and her bones. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this night, like everyone she had wandered through, was a promise. A promise that there would always be quiet places to notice, gentle songs to follow, and soft wonders to wait for. Beth found the map on a night when she thought she had seen everything. It lay atop the small table in the corner of the room, the same table that had seemed ordinary a dozen times before, but now, under the dim light, it shimmered faintly. The paper was soft, almost alive beneath her fingertips. The lines were not straight, but flowing, like rivers or wind currents, tracing paths that seemed to shift subtly each time she looked away. She leaned closer, noticing something strange. The map pulsed lightly, as if breathing, and then, as if sensing her presence, the lines began to move, coiling gently, folding, revealing paths she had not walked, doors she had not yet opened, corners of the world she had never noticed. A soft voice whispered her name. Beth froze. "Who's there?" Rick appeared in the doorway, casual, but his eyes held something more attentive than usual. "It knows you," he said quietly. "Knows me?" Beth asked. Rick nodded. "Some maps aren't about geography. Some maps are about you, about the steps you've taken, the ones you haven't, and the ones you'll never realize you're on until the path moves beneath your feet." Beth's fingers traced one of the glowing lines. The map shifted again, forming loops and arcs, patterns that felt like memories, lessons, and soft invitations all in one. She noticed a small symbol she didn't recognize, a tiny, glowing star at the center of a river-like line. She pointed at it. The map pulsed and reshaped itself. The star expanded slightly, then shrank back, and for a fleeting moment, she could see herself walking along the line, following the paths, pausing at small wonders, discovering keys, gardens, clocks and mirrors, everything she had encountered. Beth's heart beat slowly. "It's showing me." Rick stepped closer. "Not just showing, learning. Maps like this, they adjust for the traveler. They remember the steps you take, even when you think no one else could. And sometimes they remind you of the steps you've been too busy to notice yourself taking." Beth sat at the table, resting her hands lightly on the soft, glowing surface. She realized the map was patient, gentle, yet insistent in a way she could feel in her chest. Every line, every curve, every tiny glowing mark was a quiet reflection of her own journey. She let her fingers linger on one line, the one that led to the corridor that didn't end. It pulsed faintly under her touch. She followed it with her mind, feeling the echoes of every step she had taken, every choice, every pause, every quiet discovery. The map responded. It shifted to highlight the paths she had not fully walked yet, the rooms she had only glimpsed in dreams, the doors she had yet to open. And in a delicate, almost imperceptible way, it formed her name along one of the flowing lines, soft and glowing, weaving into the paths like a secret signature. Beth whispered it aloud. "Beth." The map shimmered in reply, a gentle acknowledgement, as if it had been waiting to hear her voice. Rick watched quietly. Some things you can't learn from a book or a key. Some things, the quiet truths of yourself, only reveal themselves when you take the time to move gently, notice, and listen. Beth nodded. She felt a calm swell in her chest. All the rooms, doors, keys, gardens, mirrors, corridors, and clocks, all of them had led to this, to understanding that the journey itself was the map and that she was both the traveler and the path. For a long time she traced lines she had walked, lines she had only dreamed of, lines she would one day walk, and the map remembered each one, folding gently to make room for the next, for the infinite possibilities yet to come. The fox from the garden appeared quietly beside her, curling at her feet. Beth smiled, reaching down to stroke its fur. Even this small companion felt woven into the map's soft hum, as if every small wonder of her journey mattered, counted, and was preserved. Rick finally spoke again. Remember this, Beth. The map doesn't end. It only waits. And the paths it shows you aren't just for seeing, they're for feeling, noticing, remembering. They'll take you far, but only if you're willing to pay attention to every small step. Beth's eyes rested on the glowing lines, her hand hovering over the flowing paths. She understood now that the journey was not about speed or control or even understanding fully. It was about noticing the subtle, patient, infinite rhythm of life, of experience, of herself. She leaned back in her chair, letting the soft light of the map wash over her, feeling the quiet pulse of everything she had seen and everything she had yet to see. The night outside the window was calm, indifferent to the passing hours, yet alive in a way she could feel. The stars glimmered faintly, distant and patient, and somewhere beyond doors, mirrors, corridors, gardens, and clocks, the world held its quiet, attentive breath. Beth let her eyes close. She didn't need to follow every line right now. She didn't need to understand every twist, turn, or glow. The map would wait. She would return. And in the meantime, she could rest, letting the soft rhythm of her journey settle into her chest, her mind, and her heart. Somewhere, the corridor that didn't end hummed faintly. The key she had found lay quietly beneath her pillow. The clock that counted dreams ticked gently in the hall. The garden continued to grow, the fox curled at its roots, and the mirrors waited patiently for tomorrow. Beth smiled softly, knowing she had seen enough to understand the quiet promise of it all. And somewhere, deep in the gentle glow of the map, she felt the soft recognition of her own name, remembered, acknowledged, cherished, a whisper from the world itself. She leaned back, letting the calm pulse of the journey fill her. And somewhere, out there, she knew, all the rooms, paths, and wonders continued, patient, infinite, and waiting for the next moment she was ready to notice. Beth's eyes closed fully at last, letting the soft hum of the map and the quiet rhythm of the night carry her into sleep, into dreams, into the patient unfolding of all the paths that had led her here. And somewhere she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Beth had never noticed the river before, though she must have passed it countless times in the corridors and gardens of her wandering. It appeared suddenly one quiet evening, a faint shimmer through a door she didn't remember opening. The doorway was narrow, framed with pale wood that seemed to breathe lightly beneath her fingers. She stepped through. The river was unlike any water she had seen before. It moved slowly, deliberately, glowing in soft shades of blue, violet, and gold that shifted like liquid sunlight. The surface rippled with faint patterns, tracing delicate arcs, and spirals that seemed to carry meaning, though Beth could not yet read it. She knelt by the riverbank, reaching her fingers toward the shimmering water. The instant she touched it, the colours shifted under her hand, brushing against her skin like warm silk. A whisper floated across the surface, almost musical, carrying a language she didn't know but somehow understood. It was a gentle, patient rhythm, a soft cadence of thought and feeling woven together. Rick appeared at the river's edge, hands tucked into his coat pockets, watching silently. "It speaks," he said softly. Beth turned. "Speaks?" Rick nodded. "Not with words, with colour, motion, and reflection. The river knows everything you've noticed, and everything you haven't. It reflects your presence, your attention, your thoughts." Beth leaned closer, letting her fingers skim the water. Each colour responded to her touch, pulsing faintly, as if acknowledging her. Blues deepened in her presence, golds brightened with her curiosity, violets shimmered with her quiet wonder. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Rick shrugged faintly. "Beauty is just a way the world remembers itself through us. The river doesn't care if you call it beauty. It just flows." Beth watched the colours ripple, the water moving in arcs and eddies that mirrored the journey she had taken, the corridor that didn't end, the shifting room, the key, the clock, the garden, the map. Every memory, every discovery, every soft, patient lesson was reflected in the patterns. She dipped both hands into the river, letting the water swirl around her wrists. She felt the pulse of it, the quiet rhythm beneath the surface, and realized she could sense the river's subtle memory. It remembered her steps before she had even taken them. It remembered the corridors she had wandered, the mirrors she had touched, the dreams counted in the ticking of a clock. Beth laughed softly, a sound that blended with the hum of the river. She felt lighter, freer, as if the water was carrying away the weight of questions she hadn't known she was holding. "Can anyone see it like this?" she asked. Rick shook his head slowly. Not everyone notices, not everyone listens. Some only see what's on the surface. Some never see at all. Beth dipped her hands deeper, letting the colours swirl, pulse and fold beneath her fingers. The river responded with subtle shapes, arcs like gentle hands, spirals like the curl of memory, and faint glimmers that felt almost like laughter. She closed her eyes, letting the river speak in its silent, flowing language. Each ripple carried a story, each shift a soft reflection of her own journey. And for the first time, she realized something profound. She had become part of the river. Her attention, her noticing, her quiet presence had shaped it as much as it had shaped her. Rick watched silently. Rivers like this aren't just water. They're patience. They're attention. Their memory and understanding folded into motion. They teach you how to move gently, notice quietly, and trust the rhythm of things beyond your control. Beth nodded slowly, feeling the truth of his words settle into her chest. She could feel the pulse of the river echoing the pulse of her own heart. The soft light and movement seemed endless, infinite, patient, a living reminder that the world was always there, waiting, flowing, speaking, even when she wasn't looking. She lifted her hands, letting the water drip softly back into the river. The colours lingered for a moment before fading, leaving the river calm and shimmering in gentle shades. Beth rose and took a step along the bank. The river followed, subtly shifting to reflect her movement. It curved gently, guiding her without demand, leading her past small stones and mossy edges, over fallen leaves and flowers that had floated downstream. "Will it always be here?" she asked. Rick smiled faintly. "Only as long as you notice. Rivers like this exist in attention, not in time, not in need, only in quiet noticing." Beth nodded, understanding that she had finally learned to see not just the river, but the meaning in quiet moments, the pulse of attention, the gentle unfolding of things that didn't need rushing or forcing. The river spoke again, this time in soft arcs of violet and gold that seemed almost like a sigh, a quiet acknowledgement of her presence. She knelt to touch it once more, feeling the water swirl around her fingertips, humming softly in a language that didn't need translation. She let herself lean back against the soft earth, letting the river's song wash over her. Somewhere in the movement of colours and light she felt all the lessons converge: patience, noticing, growth, understanding, presence, and quiet awe. The fox from the garden appeared silently, stepping carefully along the riverbank. It paused, looking up at her with calm, steady eyes. Beth smiled and reached down, feeling the warm pulse of its fur against her hands. Rick stepped back, allowing the moment to stretch. Beth noticed them first at the edge of the shifting hallway, where the walls softened into shadows and the gold light of the corridor dimmed. Small lanterns hovered there, floating just above the floor, swaying gently as if caught in a quiet, invisible breeze. They were unlike any lantern she had seen before, delicate, almost translucent, and filled with a light that seemed aware of its surroundings. It was soft, warm, and contained a faint echo of memory, like a faint hum of a song long forgotten. Beth approached slowly, her hand outstretched, the nearest lantern tilted slightly, as though nodding a greeting. Rick stepped silently beside her, leaning against the wall. "Ah," he said softly, "you've found them, the lanterns that remember." "Remember what?" Beth asked. "Everything," Rick replied. "Not in the sense of words or faces, but in feeling, in moments, in the small sparks that make up a life. These lanterns carry those sparks, waiting for someone to notice them." Beth reached out and touched one. The light flared gently under her palm, warm and comforting, as if it recognized her. She felt a tingle, a memory brushing the edges of her mind, the laughter of a friend she hadn't thought of in years, the soft comfort of a quiet room, the hum of the corridor that didn't end. The lantern pulsed gently. Beth realized that it wasn't just light, it was alive with recollection, carrying fragments of her journey. Rick gestured along the line of floating lanterns. Some people walk through life, seeing the world as it is, never noticing these sparks. But you, he smiled faintly, you see them. Beth's heart swelled softly. She walked along the row of lanterns, letting her hands hover near each one. Each pulse of light seemed to respond to her presence, shimmering brighter when she lingered, dimming when she moved away. She could feel the quiet rhythm of memory unfolding beneath her fingertips. One lantern drifted closer, small and fragile. Its glow was faint, almost hesitant. Beth reached for it, and the moment her fingers brushed it, a gentle warmth spread through her chest. She saw a fleeting vision, herself as a child, sitting quietly in the garden of her imagination, noticing the smallest details, the tiniest sparks of life, and feeling them matter. The lantern seemed to smile. Beth laughed softly, the sound mingling with the quiet hum of the others. She realized she had never understood how many small, unnoticed moments made up her life, how they had shaped her quietly, invisibly, like roots beneath the soil of her experiences. Rick's voice was gentle, almost reverent. The lanterns don't just remember your past. They remember the way you notice, the care you take, the attention you give. They're a reflection of you, Beth. Every small spark, every soft observation, everything you hold lightly yet faithfully. It's all in them. Beth continued along the floating row, letting the warmth wash over her. She noticed how the light changed subtly as she moved, sometimes flickering with surprise, sometimes steady and unwavering. Each lantern carried something different. Fragments of places she had walked, dreams she had dreamed, the corridors she had traversed, the key she had held, the garden she had tended with her attention. She knelt at one particularly bright lantern, letting her hands cup its glow. The memory it carried wasn't her own entirely. She saw herself laughing with a figure who resembled Rick, but not quite. A soft echo of a lesson, a gentle nudge toward understanding. The lantern pulsed again, and Beth felt the warmth of the moment imprinting gently on her heart. The other lanterns responded in kind, their glow weaving together into a soft symphony of light. Beth sat quietly among them, letting their gentle illumination fill the hallway, letting the echoes of memory and experience surround her. Rick remained in the doorway, watching without interrupting. Some people would try to capture these lights, hold them, control them. But you, he tilted his head, voice soft, you let them be. You see them, you honor them, and that's why they remember you too. Beth closed her eyes, feeling the subtle rhythm of the lantern's pulse synchronize with her own heartbeat. She let herself breathe slowly, deeply, letting the quiet wonder of the moment settle in her chest. She understood something profound. Every step, every pause, every quiet observation she had made along her journey mattered, and these lanterns were proof, a soft, glowing reflection of the life she had lived and the care she had taken. The hallway seemed to stretch gently, the lanterns drifting around her in soft arcs. She reached out occasionally, letting her fingers brush the glow. Each touch left a warmth lingering in her palm, a memory imprinted softly in her mind. The fox from the garden appeared quietly at the far end of the hallway, curling up near one of the lanterns. Beth smiled, noticing how even the smallest, simplest beings seemed to belong in this softly remembered light. She realized that she was no longer just moving through space. She was moving through attention, through care, through recognition. The lanterns were mirrors of her journey, gentle reminders of every quiet act, every soft moment she had offered the world, and every soft moment it had offered her in return. Rick stepped closer, voice barely above a whisper. One day, Beth, you'll carry this light with you even when you leave the hallway. You'll remember the way to see the quiet sparks in the world, and in doing so, you'll light them for others too. Beth looked around at the floating lanterns. She felt a profound calm. Everything she had learned, Everything she had noticed was alive here, shimmering in gentle pulses. Every small observation, every soft memory, every patient step she had taken through impossible corridors and gardens, every dream counted by the clock, it all mattered. She smiled softly, letting herself lean back among the glowing lights. She could feel them surrounding her, steady and warm, quiet and patient, holding the memory of her journey without urgency or expectation. And as she closed her eyes at last, the lanterns floated gently around her, their pulses like a lullaby, carrying her softly into sleep. Somewhere beyond the hallway, beyond doors, mirrors, gardens, clocks, keys and maps, the world hummed quietly, patient, infinite, attentive. Beth felt it all, the pulse, the warmth, the recognition, the careful unfolding of all that mattered. And she let herself drift. And somewhere the fox twitched in its sleep, the lanterns glimmered softly, and the gentle, remembered light continued to watch over her. Beth first noticed the river in a dream, though when she awoke, it lingered in her mind like a memory half remembered. It was not a river like any she had seen before, not just water flowing between banks, but a liquid tapestry, shimmering with colour that seemed to hum softly with its own gentle rhythm. One evening she found it in the corridor that had once stretched endlessly. A door appeared where none had been before, small and arched, glowing faintly. She opened it and stepped through. The river lay ahead, winding gently, its surface alive with light. Colours flowed across it in waves, deep violets that pulsed softly like a heartbeat, golds that shimmered and danced, blues and greens that sang in quiet ripples. Beth knelt at the edge and dipped her hand into the water. It was warm, soft, and hummed beneath her fingers. Each colour seemed to carry a story, a memory, a quiet secret. Rick appeared behind her, leaning casually against a tree that had sprung up along the riverbank. "Ah," he said, watching the river's glow ripple against her hand. "You've found the river that speaks." Beth tilted her head. "Speaks. How?" Rick smiled faintly. "Not in words. Not exactly. It tells its stories in light, in movement, in rhythm. If you listen carefully, you can feel what it has seen, what it remembers, and maybe even what it hopes for." Beth closed her eyes and let herself focus. The colours moved beneath her fingertips like whispers of thought and feeling. She could sense joy, curiosity, gentle wonder, even the quiet sadness that passed between things unnoticed. A soft current shifted, brushing her hand with a ripple of golden light. She felt warmth rise in her chest, a recognition of a memory she hadn't consciously recalled, the way she had once walked through the garden at night, noticing every small detail, every tiny spark of life, without seeking reward or recognition. The river pulsed again, this time in deep blue. She felt the soft tug of dreams she had not yet dared to follow, doors she had not yet opened, paths she had not yet walked. The colours were patient, guiding without force, whispering without expectation. Beth leaned closer, letting the gentle current wash over her hands and arms. She realized she could follow the flow, not to reach a destination, but to understand the subtle patterns of life itself. How moments intertwined, how attention shaped experience, how even the smallest act of noticing could ripple outward like waves across a quiet river. The fox from the garden padded beside her, dipping its paw lightly into the water. A small splash sent violet light scattering across the surface, and Beth laughed softly. She felt the playful warmth of the moment, like a secret shared between her, the river, and the quiet world around her. Rick spoke again, voice low and patient. "The river doesn't judge, it doesn't demand, it simply reflects, and in reflecting, it teaches. The colours you see, they're the echoes of attention, the soft remnants of noticing, the quiet footprints of existence." Beth watched as greens and golds swirled together, then separated again, like threads weaving an invisible tapestry. She traced the colours with her fingertips, feeling the gentle pulse of memory and possibility beneath the water's surface. A sudden, soft current of red shimmered across the river. Beth felt a warmth of courage, a quiet bravery she had carried without realizing. The river reminded her of the times she had stepped forward into uncertainty, the times she had chosen curiosity over hesitation, the moments she had listened carefully rather than rushed blindly. She smiled softly, letting the river's light fill her chest. It was more than beauty. It was recognition, proof that all the small, patient acts of noticing, all the quiet reflections, all the careful attention she had given to the impossible corridors, the gardens, the lanterns and the maps, they mattered. The river shimmered in response, gentle waves of colour brushing against her arms. She could feel the gentle tug of the current, inviting her to follow, but not demanding. The path was hers to choose, and each colour carried a whisper. Follow curiosity, notice the small, treasure the quiet, trust the unfolding. Beth knelt fully by the edge, letting her hands glide through the water. Each movement sent ripples of colour dancing across the surface, blending memories with possibility, the known with the unknown, the past, with the gentle promise of tomorrow. Rick watched quietly. Some rivers don't flow for distance or speed. They flow for attention. They move for understanding. And those who listen, they find the hidden threads of life, the small truths that shape everything. Beth nodded, closing her eyes for a moment. She could feel the river's rhythm in her chest, in her heartbeat, in her breath. She could feel the echo of every room she had walked through, every dream she had counted, every garden she had noticed, every lantern she had touched, every map she had traced. The river didn't rush. It didn't demand. It simply flowed, gently, patiently, like the quiet pulse of existence itself. Beth leaned back on the soft bank, letting the colours ripple across her hands and feet. She realised that she could carry the river with her, the memory of its calm, its quiet guidance, its patient stories, in the pulse of her own awareness. And somewhere, beyond doors, mirrors, clocks, gardens, lanterns and corridors, the river continued to flow, patient, luminous, and infinitely alive. The fox curled up beside her, eyes half closed, breathing in quiet rhythm with the river. Beth felt a warmth in her chest, a gentle exhale of calm, as if the river itself had whispered, "You are here. You notice. You matter." Beth smiled faintly, leaning her head back to let the colours wash over her one last time. The river was patient. She was patient, and together they carried the quiet wonder of attention, the soft magic of noticing, and the gentle promise of all the paths yet to be discovered. She let herself drift, not hurriedly, not anxiously, but fully present in the soft pulse of light, colour, and the slow, careful unfolding of life itself. And somewhere the river continued its luminous song, patient, infinite, and attentive, waiting for every quiet moment she would notice next. Beth had never sought all the answers. She had wandered, noticed, touched, and listened, letting curiosity guide her rather than urgency. Yet somehow, tonight, the corridor led her to a door she hadn't seen before. It was tall, its wood faintly glowing with a soft golden hue, almost breathing under her touch. The handle was cool and smooth, inviting her in without insistence. She hesitated, feeling the familiar tug of anticipation, then slowly turned the knob. The room unfolded before her like a quiet sigh. It was vast yet intimate, bathed in soft light that had no clear source. Every wall shimmered faintly, reflecting not only the space but fragments of memory, rooms she had wandered through, doors she had opened, gardens, rivers, lanterns, maps, corridors, and soft echoes of laughter. Beth stepped inside. The air was warm, filled with the scent of something familiar, like sun-warmed stone and rain-soaked earth. It felt like a place that had waited for her without ever needing to hurry. Rick appeared behind her, leaning casually against an invisible corner. "Welcome," he said quietly. "This room doesn't give answers in the way you think. It doesn't hand truths on a tray. It simply reflects, and in reflecting, it teaches." Beth's gaze wandered across the walls. She saw a moment of herself as a child, kneeling by a glowing sprout in the garden, and then another of herself watching the river shimmer in colours she had never thought to name. Every memory, every quiet observation, every patient step seemed to pulse with soft light. "It knows me," she whispered. Rick nodded. It knows you, not as a list of facts or deeds, but as a presence. All the noticing, all the quiet care, all the gentle attention you've given to the world. It remembers. Beth moved closer to the center of the room. A small table held a single, softly glowing orb. It hovered just above the surface, pulsing gently, as if breathing. She reached out and touched it. The orb rippled with light, expanding to fill the room in subtle waves. In each pulse, she saw herself reflected, moments of wonder, curiosity, kindness, laughter, even the quiet pangs of loneliness. Each fragment was soft and full of gentle wisdom. Beth closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth wash over her. She realized that she had never truly understood how much the quiet acts of noticing, the small touches, the patient waiting, the moments of reflection, had shaped her journey. The room simply reflected it all back, patient and unhurried. Rick's voice came softly from the shadows. Sometimes the answers we seek aren't found in action or force. They're found in reflection, in presence, in paying attention to the small things that make up life. This room, it shows that truth. Beth opened her eyes. The walls shimmered again, showing her walking along the corridors, tracing the glowing lines of the map, watching lanterns, feeling the river's pulse, kneeling in the garden. Each step she had taken, every quiet observation, every gentle act, it all mattered. She knelt by the orb again, letting her hand hover just above it. Each pulse of light seemed to whisper softly, reminding her, "You notice, you care, you matter." Rick stepped closer, his tone reverent. "There is no single answer here, Beth. There is understanding, gentle and patient. You've lived it, you've seen it, you've touched it, and now it's reflected back to you." Beth smiled faintly. She realized that the room itself was alive in its quiet way, shaping itself around her presence, acknowledging her attention and honoring the soft journey she had undertaken. The room was vast, yet intimate. It did not overwhelm. It did not judge. It simply reflected the patient, infinite rhythm of life, the quiet lessons of noticing, of waiting, of being present in the smallest of moments. Beth leaned back, letting the light wash over her. The soft pulse of the orb synchronized with her own heartbeat. She felt the warmth of every corridor she had wandered, every key she had held, every garden she had tended, every river she had touched, every lantern she had followed, every map she had traced. Everything converged in this quiet reflection, not demanding answers but offering understanding. She realized with a gentle exhale that she already carried all the truths she needed: patience, curiosity, attention, kindness, and the quiet courage to notice. The fox appeared quietly at the edge of the room, curling at her feet. Beth reached down to stroke it, feeling the soft warmth of life flowing gently around her. She smiled, recognizing the continuity of the journey, that every small step, every quiet observation, every patient pause had led her here. Rick spoke softly, almost to himself. "Some rooms are not doors to the world outside, but mirrors to the world inside. And when you see it, you realize that all the wandering, all the waiting, all the noticing was never wasted." Beth closed her eyes, letting the gentle reflections of the room settle into her mind. She could feel the soft pulse of memory and awareness threading through her chest, her heartbeat, her breath. The room didn't need to be understood fully. Its presence alone was enough, a gentle, infinite acknowledgement of the journey she had undertaken and the quiet wisdom she had gathered. She leaned back against the glowing walls, letting the warm light flow over her. Every memory, every quiet act, every patient step seemed to pulse gently, as if the room itself were breathing in harmony with her. And somewhere beyond the corridors, doors, gardens, lanterns, rivers, maps, and clocks, the world continued quietly, patient and infinite, attentive to every small spark of awareness. Beth exhaled, softly, fully, and felt the calm settle into her chest. She realized that understanding, true understanding, was not about answers at all. It was about noticing, being present, and letting life's gentle rhythms unfold without expectation. She smiled faintly, closing her eyes at last, letting the soft hum of the room carry her into rest. The orb pulsed slowly, gently, and the fox shifted softly, its warmth a quiet reassurance. And somewhere the room continued to hold every small spark she had ever noticed, every patient act, every quiet lesson, infinite, gentle, and watching over her softly. Beth drifted, fully present in the calm, the light, the soft understanding of her own journey. Beth stepped into the open space where the corridor had dissolved into light. Above her, the sky stretched endlessly, but it was not the sky of day or night. It shimmered softly, folding and unfolding in gentle waves, as though each colour held a memory waiting to be remembered. Rick appeared quietly at her side, leaning on a soft curve of light. "Ah," he said, voice soft, "you've found the sky that folds memories. It doesn't just hang above, it carries the past, the present, and hints of what could be, all at once." Beth tilted her head, watching the colours ripple slowly. Soft blues brushed against golds, and faint violets shimmered at the edges. Every fold seemed alive, pulsing gently, like the rhythm of a heartbeat she had almost forgotten. "Does it speak?" she asked softly. Rick nodded. "Not in words, in echoes, in shapes, in colours. The sky remembers everything it has seen, every choice, every gentle notice, every small act of attention, and if you watch carefully it will let you feel what it knows." Beth lifted her hands, letting the soft folds of light brush against her fingertips. Each touch carried warmth, subtle vibrations that traced memories she hadn't consciously held. She felt the laughter of friends long gone, the quiet comfort of small rooms, the pulse of lanterns, the shimmer of the river, the soft guidance of maps. A particular fold of golden light brushed her palm, carrying the warmth of her childhood, the first time she had noticed something extraordinary without knowing why. A wave of nostalgia rose, soft and gentle, filling her chest with calm. The sky folded again, a slow, deliberate motion, revealing a hidden stream of violet light. Beth followed it with her eyes. It traced a path she had walked long ago, a corridor that didn't end, a door she had once hesitated to open, and the soft, patient steps she had taken in quiet reflection. Rick spoke softly beside her. "The sky doesn't judge, it doesn't rush. It simply shows. It folds the memories of all who pass beneath it, carrying them in gentle arcs like a lullaby that never ends." Beth smiled faintly. She lifted her head and allowed the light to wrap around her, feeling the quiet pulse of countless moments echoing through the folds. She understood, finally, that each fold of colour was a reflection not just of the world, but of her own presence, her own noticing, her own patient attention to the small and fleeting. A soft current of green and blue swirled gently, brushing against her arms. She felt the comfort of those quiet rivers she had traced, the lanterns she had touched, the maps she had followed. Each fold of the sky carried the essence of every small, unnoticed act, not for recognition, but for the quiet beauty of existence itself. Beth walked slowly beneath the folding sky, letting her hands glide through the light. Each fold responded, shimmering brighter as if acknowledging her presence, gentle arcs of colour brushing against her skin like soft reminders of all she had learned. Rick watched quietly, leaning on a wave of violet light. "Some people see the sky as just sky," he said softly. "But when you pay attention, really pay attention, you'll find it folds memories like paper, keeps them safe, and sometimes lets you feel them again. That's the gift of noticing, Beth. That's the gift you carry." Beth felt the truth of it settle gently in her chest. She realized that the sky's gentle folds reflected everything she had touched, everything she had seen, every patient step she had taken along her quiet journey. Each color was a memory, each ripple a reflection, each fold a gentle echo of understanding. She knelt by a soft golden fold and let her fingers trace the arcs. The light pulsed beneath her hand, soft and patient. She could feel the gentle rhythm of the world, of every quiet act of noticing, flowing through her fingertips and into her heart. A soft laughter floated across the light, a memory of joy she had almost forgotten, a small triumph, a tiny recognition of care given and received. Beth smiled, letting it wash over her like a warm tide. Rick's voice was barely above a whisper now. The sky holds it all. All the corridors, gardens, rivers, lanterns, maps, rooms, and soft memories. All the gentle noticing, all the quiet courage, all the patient reflection. Every fold is a reflection of life itself, waiting for someone to feel it. Beth leaned back, letting the colours of the sky swirl gently around her. She felt herself breathing in rhythm with the folds, letting their patient, infinite motion carry her awareness. She realised she could follow them, not to reach an end, but to feel the soft continuity of existence, the infinite echo of noticing, being, and quietly unfolding. The fox appeared at her side, curling up in a small swirl of violet light. Beth smiled softly and reached down to stroke it. Its warmth felt like a quiet reassurance, a gentle tether to the continuity of all the small, meaningful acts she had carried with her. The folds of the sky continued their slow dance, arcs of blue, gold, green, and violet shimmering in soft harmony. Beth felt a deep calm settle in her chest, a quiet understanding that the sky, patient and infinite, would always carry the echoes of her journey. And somewhere, beyond corridors, lanterns, rivers, maps, and rooms, the world continued its gentle rhythm, patient, luminous, attentive to every quiet spark of life. Beth closed her eyes at last, letting the soft folds of the sky carry her into rest. Each colour, each ripple, each fold became a gentle lullaby, brushing against her mind, her chest, her heartbeat, and letting her drift fully into calm. She smiled faintly, breathing slowly, fully, letting the infinite, patient rhythm of the sky settle within her. And somewhere the sky continued to fold gently, patiently, infinitely, holding every memory, every quiet act, every soft wonder, and letting it shimmer softly for all those willing to notice. Beth walked slowly along the edge of a vast, quiet forest. The corridor that had stretched into infinite corridors and folding skies had led her here, to a grove of trees unlike any she had seen before. The trees were tall and slender, their trunks glowing faintly with a soft golden hue, their leaves shimmering in shades of blue and green. But it wasn't their light that captured her attention, it was their whispers. Soft murmurs floated on the gentle breeze, carrying words she couldn't fully hear, yet understood. They weren't commands or questions, but quiet observations, like a secret conversation between the trees and the world around them. Rick appeared beside her, leaning against a shimmering trunk. "Ah," he said softly, "you've found the whispering trees. They speak not with words, but with attention. They reflect what's been noticed and what has been left unseen." Beth tilted her head. "So they talk?" "Not exactly," Rick replied. "They listen, remember, and respond. Their whispers are echoes of understanding, the small truths of the world you might otherwise overlook. They don't demand you act, they simply acknowledge." Beth stepped closer to one of the trees. Its bark was smooth beneath her fingers, warm and comforting, and the soft hum of its whispers wrapped around her like a gentle lullaby. She felt the rhythm of its life, slow, patient, and infinitely attentive. A small leaf drifted down and brushed against her hand. When she touched it, a ripple of memory flowed through her. The corridor that didn't end, the glowing map, the floating lanterns, the river that spoke in colours, the room that held all answers, and the sky that folded memories. Each memory pulsed softly in her chest, interwoven with the rhythm of the whispering trees. Rick spoke again, voice soft, almost reverent. "Some people walk through life never hearing the whispers, but those who notice, who pay attention to the subtle, the quiet, the patient, they understand more than they realize." Beth nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle in her chest. She moved along the grove, letting her hands brush the trunks of the whispering trees. Each touch seemed to carry a fragment of the world's quiet wisdom, a pattern, a gentle reminder, a soft reflection of what had been seen and felt. One tree pulsed faintly beneath her fingers, and Beth felt a surge of understanding. It wasn't just her own journey being mirrored here, it was the journey of all who had noticed, who had paused, who had reflected quietly and gently along their own paths. The trees held the echoes of patient presence, of attention given without expectation, of the quiet courage to truly see. Beth sat beneath the largest tree, leaning against its glowing trunk. She closed her eyes, listening to the soft murmurs that flowed like a slow, gentle tide. Each whisper carried recognition of her, of the world, of every small act that mattered in ways unseen but deeply felt. Rick remained nearby, silent, observing her without intrusion. "The trees teach a quiet truth," he said softly. "Life isn't only in action, in movement, or in discovery. Sometimes the most profound wisdom comes from stillness, from listening, from noticing what's been right in front of you all along." Beth exhaled slowly, letting the warmth of the tree, the gentle whispers, and the pulse of her own heartbeat converge. She realized that every corridor, every map, every lantern, every river, every room, every fold of sky had led her to this quiet understanding, that the world, patient and attentive, mirrored those who noticed it with care. A breeze stirred the grove, sending leaves cascading like soft rain. Each leaf carried a whisper of a memory, a lesson, or a gentle encouragement. Beth reached out, letting them brush against her hands and face. She felt the soft touch of connection, a quiet bond between herself, the trees, and the patient rhythm of everything around her. The fox padded silently beside her, curling its tail around her feet. Beth smiled, feeling the warmth of companionship, the quiet acknowledgement of shared presence. She realized that the whispers weren't just for her alone. They were part of a vast, patient conversation that included everything and everyone who took the time to notice. Rick's voice came softly again. "When you leave, Beth, carry this with you. The whispers of the trees, the gentle rhythms of the river, the folds of the sky, the glowing light of the lanterns, the corridors, maps, and rooms, they're all echoes of a simple truth. Noticing, being present, and caring quietly is its own kind of magic." Beth nodded, letting the truth sink in fully. She rested her head against the tree and closed her eyes, letting the whispers fill her mind. She could feel the pulse of life in every murmur, the soft rhythm of attention, the infinite patience of the world reflected back through the grove. The forest held her gently, cradling her in light and whispers. She felt the soft warmth of memory, reflection, and understanding settling into her chest, spreading slowly through her body like a quiet tide. Beth realized she could rest here, fully, without urgency or expectation. The whispering trees would continue their gentle murmurs, carrying echoes of her journey, her attention, her noticing, and every quiet act she had undertaken. And somewhere, beyond corridors, lanterns, rivers, maps, rooms, skies, and forests, the world continued patiently, infinitely attentively, holding every quiet spark of life and understanding. Beth let herself drift, leaning against the glowing trunk, letting the whispers guide her into rest. Each murmur, each soft rhythm, each pulse of light was a lullaby, carrying her gently into sleep. The fox twitched softly in its sleep, leaves drifted like gentle sparks of memory, and the forest pulsed with quiet attention. Beth smiled faintly, letting the infinite, patient rhythm of the whispering trees settle within her, and somewhere the trees continued to whisper, patiently, infinitely, gently, holding the quiet echoes of every small act, every soft notice, and every patient reflection. Beth closed her eyes fully at last, letting the warmth, whispers, and soft light carry her into dreams, into calm, into the gentle unfolding of everything that mattered. When Beth awoke, the whispering trees still murmured softly around her, but their rhythm had changed. The cadence of their voices was no longer a steady tide. It was shifting, drawing her attention forward, as though the forest itself was guiding her towards something she had yet to see. The fox stirred beside her, stretching before trotting a few paces ahead. It paused, looking back at her, tail flicking in quiet invitation. Beth rose, brushing the fallen leaves from her lap, and followed. They moved through a narrow path between the glowing trunks until the forest opened into a wide clearing. There, spanning a deep, still gorge, was a bridge. It was unlike any bridge she had ever seen. The structure shimmered faintly, as though it were woven from strands of moonlight and memory. The planks beneath it seemed carved from time itself, each one etched with scenes that shifted and changed as she stepped closer. A child's laughter, a quiet dinner, a lone figure watching the sunset, two hands meeting in a passing moment. Rick appeared, leaning against one of the posts at the bridge's entrance. "This," he said softly, "is the bridge that ties moments. Every step you take will bring you through the threads of your own story. The moments that made you, the ones you've forgotten, the ones you never realized mattered." Beth looked at the first plank and saw herself as a child, sitting at a kitchen table tracing shapes on the wood with her fingertip. She could almost feel the sunlight from the window on her cheek. She stepped onto it, and the memory settled gently into her, not as something to regret or long for, but as something to acknowledge, a single knot in the long thread of her life. The next plank showed a rainy day, the streets shining with reflections. She saw herself walking, hands deep in her pockets, head lowered against the drizzle. Not unhappy, just present, taking in the world's muted colours. With each step, the bridge unfolded more of these fragments. Some were vivid. Laughter shared with friends, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of waves crashing against dark rocks. Others were quieter still. The moment she decided to stay, the moment she decided to leave, the moment she paused before speaking and realized the silence was enough. Rick followed her slowly, his voice low and steady. "People think life is made of grand events, Beth. But it's the moments, the smallest ones, that weave the real shape of who we are. This bridge, it doesn't just show them, it ties them together, so you can see the thread they've been forming all along." Beth stopped halfway across the bridge. Ahead, the planks glowed more brightly, as if leading her towards something she had yet to face. The air was cooler here, the gorge beneath them deep and still, holding shadows like a vessel of waiting. She stepped onto the next plank and saw a memory she didn't expect, one that had been buried, or perhaps avoided. It was the day she said goodbye to someone she thought she'd see again. She could feel the heaviness of that parting, the way her chest had tightened. But the plank didn't hold only the pain. It also held the way the sunlight had glinted on the other person's hair, the sound of the wind in the trees, the way the air had carried both sorrow and gratitude in the same breath. Beth lingered there, breathing deeply, until she could feel the moment settle into its place, not as something to carry like a stone, but as something to hold gently as part of the thread. The fox walked ahead, stepping lightly, its paws making no sound. Beth followed, and soon the memories shifted. Now they showed futures, possible ones, woven faintly in silver light. She saw herself sitting in a small room lined with the books, writing by candlelight. She saw herself walking beside an unfamiliar shore, the horizon stretching wide. She saw herself standing beneath a star-filled sky, speaking softly to someone whose face she could not yet see. She realized the bridge was not only tying together her past moments, but weaving them forward into what was yet to come. Rick's voice came again, quiet as the hum of the forest. "The past and future aren't two separate things, Beth. They're threads in the same weave. Each moment, no matter how small, ties to the next. And you're the one who chooses how the thread continues." Beth's steps grew slower, more deliberate. She could feel the thread gathering in her, each knot, each shimmer, each memory and possibility settling into place. She reached the final plank and stood still. Beyond the bridge, the path curved into mist. She could not see where it led, but she could feel its pull, gentle, steady, certain. The fox crossed first, disappearing briefly before reappearing at the path's edge. It waited, its golden eyes catching the faint light. Beth turned once to look back. The bridge shimmered behind her, its planks still holding the moving images of her life. She knew that if she ever returned, it would show more. Moments she had yet to live, threads she had yet to tie. Rick stepped up beside her. "You can't carry all of it, Beth," he said softly. "But you can carry the shape of it, the way the moments connect, the way they've brought you here. That's enough. More than enough." Beth nodded. She stepped off the bridge, feeling the shift as the planks behind her faded into light. The forest beyond was quiet, the mist curling around the edges of the path ahead. As she walked forward, she felt lighter, though she carried more than before, not in weight, but in meaning. The bridge had not removed her past or given her a certain future. It had simply tied the moments together so she could see the thread, and in seeing it, walk with clarity. The fox trotted ahead, the mist opening just enough for the next few steps to show. Beth followed, knowing the rest would reveal itself in time. Behind her, the bridge continued to shimmer in the gorge, holding the quiet, intricate weave of every moment, tied gently, patiently, into a thread that would carry forward into whatever came next. Beth didn't look back again. She didn't need to. Beth walked through the mist, following the soft glow ahead when the world around her shifted. The path dissolved into a wide, open expanse where night had settled completely, but it was not an ordinary night. It was a night that seemed to remember itself. Every shadow, every glimmer of starlight, every soft curve of darkness held echoes of moments long past, moments barely noticed, and moments yet to arrive. The air was cool and calm, carrying a gentle hum that resonated in her chest. It was as though the night itself had breathed in all that had happened before and was now exhaling softly, carefully around her. Rick appeared silently at her side, leaning on a faint beam of starlight. "This," he whispered, voice almost swallowed by the gentle hum, "is the night that remembers. It carries memory differently than the trees or rivers or bridges. It folds all that exists, not just what has been noticed, but what has been felt, feared, loved, and quietly carried." Beth paused, letting the stillness wash over her. The night around her was alive in a subtle way. Stars pulsed softly, as if breathing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Shadows shifted like slow tides, and the gentle rustle of the unseen carried fragments of whispers, laughter, tears, and soft sighs from countless times and places. She lifted her hands and the darkness responded. Shadows stretched, shimmered, faintly, revealing shapes she had known and shapes she had yet to meet. Each shift carried warmth, a quiet acknowledgement that every choice, every hesitation, every careful notice had left its mark. Rick's voice came again. "The night doesn't demand understanding. It doesn't need recognition. It simply remembers. And in remembering, it holds space for those who have been part of it, who have left even the smallest trace." Beth stepped forward, letting the night wrap gently around her. She could feel the pulse of memory in the soft hum beneath her feet, in the faint glow that hovered over the horizon, and in the distant echo of moments that had once seemed fleeting. A memory of her childhood came first, kneeling in the garden, noticing a single dewdrop on a leaf, marveling quietly at its perfection. The night remembered it, folding it gently into the darkness, letting it shimmer like a faint star in her mind. Another memory followed, a small act of kindness she had done for a stranger long ago. She remembered the warmth in her chest at the time, and the night held it too, pulsing softly with the same gentle rhythm. A third memory surfaced, a loss she had once feared would never soften. The night did not hide it, did not diminish it. It simply embraced it, letting the edges blur, letting the sharpness of grief fold into understanding and quiet acceptance. Beth felt tears warm her cheeks, though they were not sorrowful tears. They were the gentle recognition of the journey she had carried, all the small acts, all the careful noticing, all the quiet courage, all the moments she had endured and cherished. The fox appeared beside her, tail brushing lightly against her ankle. Its presence was soft, grounding, a reminder that even in the vastness of remembered night, connection and warmth remained. Rick gestured subtly to the horizon. "The night doesn't forget," he said, "but it doesn't hold tightly either. It lets memories live and breathe. It lets them fold into new understanding. And it reminds those who walk within it that they are part of something larger, something patient, something infinite." Beth closed her eyes, letting the dark pulse of memory, awareness, and gentle reflection settle within her. Each heartbeat synchronized with the hum of the night, and she felt herself stretching softly, expanding into the calm, infinite space that held her journey. A ripple of starlight moved across the expanse, showing fleeting images, a smile shared, a hand held, a whispered word, a soft pause that had changed everything. Beth realized she had walked through 1,000 quiet worlds, yet this night gathered them all, folding them into a single, infinite, understanding breath. The fox curled up beside her, its warmth a quiet anchor. Beth reached down, letting her hand rest on its soft fur, feeling the steady pulse beneath her fingers. She understood now that the night was not just memory, it was presence, not just reflection, but recognition, a patient, gentle witness to all that had been and all that would be. Rick's voice softened even further, almost a whisper carried away by the gentle hum. Most people fear forgetting, or they fear remembering, but sometimes the gift is in letting the night hold it. All the moments, all the choices, all the small, careful acts. Let it remember, and let it be gentle with you in return. Beth leaned back, letting the dark embrace her softly. She could feel every corridor, every lantern, every river, every bridge, every tree, every fold of sky, every whisper and every patient notice she had ever experienced pulsing in gentle harmony with the night. It was infinite and patient, holding her with a calm understanding. She could rest here fully without urgency, without fear, knowing that every step she had taken had mattered, and that every quiet act of noticing had left a luminous echo in the vastness around her. The night shifted, folding in gentle arcs above her, letting each star pulse with the soft rhythm of her own heartbeat. Shadows moved like slow tides, carrying memories of love, wonder, patience, and understanding. Beth smiled faintly, breathing slowly, fully. She let herself drift, carried by the gentle hum of remembered moments, the soft pulse of light and shadow, the patient unfolding of infinite space. And somewhere, the night continued to remember, gently, infinitely, patiently, holding every quiet act, every soft notice, every patient reflection, and letting it shimmer softly for anyone willing to notice. Beth closed her eyes fully, letting the warmth, whispers, and soft pulses carry her into rest, dreams, and the gentle unfolding of everything that mattered. The fox shifted, tail curling softly around her feet, a quiet reassurance. The stars above pulsed gently in rhythm with the night itself, and Beth exhaled, fully, completely, letting the calm settle into her chest. And somewhere, the night continued to hold it all, softly, infinitely, patiently. Beth stepped from the night into something softer, lighter, and fragrant. The world around her shimmered, and the air carried a delicate scent of flowers and damp earth. She had arrived at a garden unlike any she had known, a garden that never ended. Paths curved gently in every direction, each lined with plants that glowed faintly in soft hues of blue, gold, and violet. Flowers unfurled as she passed, petals brushing the air like whispers, leaves shimmering with quiet life. Even the air seemed aware, responding to her presence with gentle warmth. Rick appeared silently beside her, leaning on a trunk that seemed alive with light. "This," he said softly, "is the garden that never ended. Not because it stretches infinitely, but because it holds every step you've taken, every moment you've cherished, and every quiet act of noticing. Here, the journey and the garden are one." Beth walked slowly, letting her hands trail over the glowing plants. Each touch sent a pulse through her chest, a reminder of all she had learned. The corridors, the rivers, the lanterns, the bridges, the sky, the whispering trees, and the patient, infinite night. The fox padded softly beside her, sniffing the air, then curling beside a violet bloom that pulsed like a heartbeat. Beth smiled faintly, feeling the warmth of companionship, the quiet anchor that reminded her she was never truly alone. She followed a winding path until she came to a small fountain, its water shimmering with light. The gentle sound of flowing water carried echoes of laughter and soft conversations, moments of reflection and quiet realizations. She knelt beside it, dipping her hands into the cool, luminous water, feeling the rhythm of life ripple gently through her fingers. Rick's voice came softly, almost blending with the sound of the fountain. "The garden doesn't just hold beauty, Beth. It holds understanding. Every plant, every bloom, every ripple in the water is part of the reflection of all you've seen, all you've felt, and all you've quietly shaped." Beth closed her eyes for a moment, letting the soft fragrance and the gentle pulse of the garden flow through her. She could feel the thread of her own journey winding through it. Each small act, each patient moment, each quiet choice, all reflected back in the gentle luminescence of the flora around her. A delicate wind stirred, carrying petals that floated past her face like soft reminders. Each one seemed to carry a fragment of memory, a laugh she had shared, a comforting touch, a moment of stillness, a decision made with quiet courage. She let them brush against her, feeling the soft imprint of her own life reflected in the garden. She rose and walked further along the path, noticing how each section seemed to respond to her presence. A bed of violet flowers shimmered faintly, recalling the bridge that tied moments. A cluster of golden blossoms reminded her of the night that remembered itself. A small stream lined with glowing stones mirrored the whispering trees, soft and patient in their quiet understanding. Beth realized that the garden was not merely a place, it was a living tapestry of her journey, infinitely patient, infinitely forgiving, infinitely beautiful. Each step she took was acknowledged, each quiet moment honored, and each memory folded gently into the endless weave of the garden. Rick's tone softened even further, almost reverent. You see, Beth, life isn't only in the extraordinary or the dramatic. Sometimes the most profound moments are the quiet ones, the acts of noticing, the patient pauses, the care given without expectation. The garden remembers them all. Beth knelt beside a glowing bed of small flowers, their petals brushing lightly against her fingertips. She could feel the warmth of each moment reflected here, the gentle pulse of every choice, every pause, every whisper she had given to the world. The fox nudged her, hand softly, and she smiled, letting the simple, quiet bond remind her that presence was its own kind of magic. She realized that she didn't need to rush through the garden. It would always be here, patient, infinite, and quietly acknowledging every step she had taken. Beth wandered further, following a path that curved into a soft hill, where she could see the garden stretching endlessly beyond the horizon. The luminescent blooms glowed like a gentle sea of stars, each pulse a reflection of quiet understanding. She leaned back against a glowing tree, letting the light wash over her face. The garden didn't demand recognition. It didn't rush her. It simply held her, patient and infinite, like a lullaby that never ended. Rick's voice came quietly, blending with the gentle rustle of leaves. When you leave, Beth, carry this with you. The garden exists not only here, but in every step you take, every choice you make, and every quiet moment you notice. That's the magic of attention, of presence, of patient care. Beth closed her eyes fully, letting the gentle luminescence, the soft fragrance, and the patient pulse of the garden settle into her chest. She could feel the rhythm of her journey, the thread that had led her through corridors, bridges, skies, and nights, now folding gently into the endless garden. A faint breeze stirred the petals once more, sending shimmering fragments of light into the air. The fox curled at her feet, its warmth a comforting anchor in the infinite beauty around her. She felt the gentle hum of life pulsing through every leaf, every petal, every soft shimmer of light. Beth exhaled, softly, fully, letting the calm settle within her. She realized that understanding didn't come from rushing or demanding answers. It came from presence, from noticing, from letting life's quiet rhythms unfold around her and within her. And somewhere, the garden continued, infinitely, patiently, holding every small spark, every act of noticing, every quiet reflection shimmering gently in soft, endless light. Beth smiled faintly, breathing slowly, fully. She let herself drift, carried by the gentle luminescence, the soft fragrance, the infinite patient pulse of the garden. And somewhere, the fox shifted, curling its tail softly, a quiet reassurance that the garden and its endless, patient rhythm would continue, always waiting, always glowing, always acknowledging every step she had taken. Beth closed her eyes at last, letting the gentle, patient infinity of the garden carry her into rest, dreams, and calm. Beth stepped gently from the endless garden into a clearing bathed in soft, pure light. It wasn't the light of sun or fire or lantern. It was something quieter, more profound, as if the light itself had remembered every moment of her journey and now wanted to embrace her with it. Rick stood beside her, smiling faintly, his eyes reflecting the gentle brilliance that surrounded them. "This," he said softly, "is the light that finds everything. It doesn't judge, it doesn't demand. It simply touches all that exists, the corridors, the rivers, the lanterns, the bridges, the whispering trees, the folding skies, the patient night, the endless garden, and you. Everything you've noticed, everything you've carried, everything you are, it finds it all." Beth raised her hands, letting the light brush her fingertips. Each touch sent warmth spiraling through her chest, spreading softly into every corner of her mind, her heart, her being. She could feel all the threads of her journey, the small, quiet acts of noticing, the moments of reflection, the pauses of patience, the careful choices, weaving together in luminous harmony. The fox padded to her side, its fur catching the gentle radiance, a living tether to warmth and presence. Beth smiled, bending down to stroke its head. She could feel the pulse of life, patient and steady, echoing through the bond they shared. Rick's voice was soft, almost a whisper in the glow. Light doesn't just illuminate, it remembers. It carries the echoes of every small kindness, every careful notice, every patient step. And now it finds you, Beth. Not to change you, but to reflect all you've carried, all you've learned, all you've been. Beth exhaled slowly, letting the light settle into her chest. She could see faint echoes shimmering in the brilliance, the corridors that had stretched infinitely, the lanterns that had guided her, the rivers that had whispered in colors, the bridge that had tied moments together, the night that remembered itself, the garden that never ended. Each memory glowed softly, woven into the radiance like threads of gold and silver. She realized fully that the light did not erase the shadows she had carried. It did not hide the moments of grief or fear or uncertainty. Instead, it folded them gently into itself, making them part of the whole, part of the pulse of life, part of the quiet tapestry of being she had slowly, patiently woven. Beth lifted her head, eyes tracing the edges of the clearing. The light stretched infinitely, soft and patient, carrying the essence of everything she had experienced and everything she had yet to discover. It was neither rushing nor fading. It simply was, quietly, infinitely, embracing all that existed. Rick stepped closer, voice gentle. Most people chase light, thinking it will show them the way or give them answers. But the truth is, light finds those who notice, who reflect, who carry themselves patiently through the world, and it finds them not to lead, but to show them the shape of all they've carried, the echo of all they've been. Beth walked slowly through the clearing, letting the glow brush her hands, her shoulders, her face. Every step brought a new pulse of recognition, a memory of care given, of attention received, of quiet courage, of soft understanding. She felt the gentle accumulation of all the small acts, the small notices, the quiet choices forming a subtle, luminous weight in her chest. Not heavy, but grounding, comforting, whole. The fox trotted beside her, its paws making no sound, its presence steady and reassuring. Beth felt herself expand gently into the light, a soft stretching that carried both gratitude and reflection, both quiet awe and deep understanding. Rick gestured toward the far edge of the clearing, where the light seemed to curve toward the horizon, folding softly into itself. "This is the part you carry with you, Beth. Not the corridors or bridges or gardens themselves, but the sense of patient noticing, of careful reflection, of presence that threads through everything you do. That's the light that finds everything, and you're part of it." Beth closed her eyes and breathed fully, feeling the light pulse through her like a slow, steady heartbeat. She could feel the accumulation of everything she had experienced, the corridors that taught patience, the bridges that tied moments, the whispering trees that reflected quiet understanding, the night that remembered, the garden that never ended, all held gently within this radiance. She exhaled softly, letting the warmth, the gentle brilliance, the patient glow carry her into calm. She felt her journey stretch behind her like a soft ribbon, each fold, each echo, each pulse illuminated and acknowledged. Beth opened her eyes one last time and saw faint shapes shimmering within the light. The fox, the paths, the subtle echoes of all she had loved and noticed. She realized fully that the light was not an ending, nor a beginning. It was continuity, presence, understanding, the patient, infinite reflection of everything that mattered. She smiled faintly, letting herself drift into the warmth, feeling each breath, each heartbeat, each quiet memory fold into the gentle glow around her. The light pulsed softly, endlessly, carrying not just her but the echoes of all small acts, all patient noticing, all gentle understanding she had ever given or received. And somewhere beyond the garden, the night, the bridge, the corridors, the rivers, the lanterns, the trees, the skies, the world continued patiently, infinitely, holding the quiet, luminous echoes of all that had been and all that would ever be noticed. Beth stretched softly, letting the light carry her fully. The fox curled at her feet, its warmth steady. She felt the infinite rhythm of patient attention, quiet understanding, and gentle reflection fold around her, holding her in soft embrace. And somewhere, in that calm, patient brilliance, Beth realized that all was as it should be, luminous, infinite, and full of quiet wonder. She closed her eyes, exhaling fully, letting the light carry her into rest, dreams, and infinite calm. And with that, she stretched into the stars,